The rain was relentless that night, pounding against the old house like it was trying to break its way inside. The wind howled through the cracks in the windows, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, a lonely, hollow sound that only made the night feel darker. Claire sat alone in the living room, the only light coming from a small lamp in the corner. Her hands trembled as she held a worn blanket to her chest. Her eyes were red and swollen, her throat raw from crying. "If I hadn't gotten up for a glass of water that night," she whispered to herself, her voice breaking, "maybe none of this would have happened. Maybe I'd still be me." Her words fell into the silence like fragile glass, shattering the stillness around her. "But fate doesn't ask for permission," she said softly, her lips trembling. "It just happens. And you're left standing in the wreckage, wondering when everything went wrong." A tear slipped down her cheek. She didn't bother to wipe it away. Her heart felt heavy, bruised, like it might give out at any moment. The storm outside was nothing compared to the storm raging inside her chest. It had been a quiet summer before everything changed. Claire had just turned 18, freshly graduated, with the promise of college ahead of her. Her mother, worried about the wild parties and dangerous crowds in the city, sent her to stay in a small rural town with her uncle Elias. It was supposed to be safe there, quiet, a place where she could focus on her studies and prepare for her future. The town was like something out of an old postcard. Rolling green fields stretched for miles, a lazy river winding through the center, and a single main street lined with family-owned stores and cafes. Everyone knew everyone, and strangers were met with cautious smiles and curious glances. To Claire, it felt suffocating at first. She wasn't used to the slow pace, the way people talked to her like they'd known her forever. But as the days passed, the stillness started to feel comforting. And Elias was different from what she remembered. The last time she'd seen him, she was 14, awkward and shy, still figuring out who she was. Back then, he'd seemed larger than life. The cool, slightly rebellious uncle who always made her laugh and snuck her extra desserts when her mother wasn't looking. Now, at 40, Elias still had that mischievous charm, but there was something deeper about him, too. His dark eyes seemed to hold unspoken stories, and his voice carried a warmth that made Claire feel safe in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. "Look at you," Elias had said the day she arrived, ruffling her hair with a grin. "Last time I saw you, you barely came up to my shoulder. Now you're all grown up." Claire laughed, rolling her eyes. "People grow, Uncle Elias. It's kind of what we do." He smirked. "Guess I'll have to get used to that." It was a small exchange, nothing special. But for Claire, it was the first thread in a web she didn't realize was forming around her. The first week was easy. Elias cooked breakfast every morning and made terrible jokes that had Claire groaning and laughing at the same time. They took evening walks by the river, talking about everything and nothing, while fireflies danced in the warm summer air. At night, Claire studied in the quiet guest room, the window open to let in the breeze, while Elias read in the living room. It was peaceful, simple, safe. But safety is fragile. And sometimes, the smallest thing can crack it wide open. One evening, they were watching a movie together. Claire sat curled up on one side of the couch, Elias on the other. It was a silly comedy, nothing serious. But halfway through, Claire turned her head and froze. The flickering light from the TV illuminated Elias's face in a way she'd never noticed before. The sharp lines of his jaw, the faint shadow of stubble, the thoughtful crease between his brows, and suddenly, he didn't just look like her uncle. He looked like a man whose presence made her heart pound in a way that scared her. She snapped her gaze back to the screen, her cheeks burning. "Don't be ridiculous, Claire. He's family. He's safe." But that night, lying awake in the dark, she couldn't shake the image from her mind. From then on, things felt different. She started to notice little things. The way his hand brushed hers when he passed her a plate at dinner. The way his voice softened when he asked about her day. The way his laughter seemed to linger in the air long after he'd stopped. And maybe, just maybe, he was noticing her too. One humid night, unable to sleep, Claire padded to the kitchen in a thin cotton nightdress. She was pouring herself a glass of water when she heard Elias behind her. "Can't sleep?" he asked, his voice low and rough with drowsiness. She turned, startled. Oh, I didn't hear you. He leaned against the doorway, his eyes lingering on her for just a beat too long. That dress, he teased lightly, trying to cover whatever had just flickered across his face. You trying to give me a heart attack? Claire laughed, flustered. It's just a nightdress. Don't be dramatic. Elias smiled, but there was something unreadable in his expression. Yeah. Sure. The moment passed quickly, but it left Claire rattled. Back in her room, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her pulse racing. Something was happening between them. She didn't understand it. She didn't know if she wanted to. All she knew was that when Elias passed by her door later, his footsteps slow and lingering, she held her breath, waiting, wishing, terrified. And deep down, beneath all the fear and confusion, one dangerous thought took root. What if he feels the same way? The following morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a heavy, misty silence that clung to the house like an unwelcome guest. Claire sat at the kitchen table, absent-mindedly stirring her cereal while Elias moved about the kitchen, humming a tune under his breath. He seemed perfectly normal, like nothing had happened the night before. But Claire wasn't normal. Not anymore. Her mind kept replaying those brief, electrifying seconds in the kitchen. The way his gaze had lingered. The way his voice had dropped, soft and teasing, but not quite casual. It was like a song she couldn't get out of her head, looping over and over until it drowned out everything else. Elias set a plate of toast in front of her and sat across the table. You look like you didn't sleep much, he said, his tone light. Studying too late again? Claire forced a smile, staring down at the soggy cereal in her bowl. Something like that. You've got to take care of yourself, Elias said, his brow creasing in concern. You push too hard, you'll burn out before you even get to college. There it was again, that gentle, protective tone that made her chest ache. She wanted to believe it was just care. Just family. But a tiny, dangerous part of her wondered if there was something more hidden beneath it. Claire's hands trembled slightly as she picked up her spoon. She couldn't let him see her like this, shaken, confused, terrified by her own thoughts. I'll be fine, she said quickly. I just need coffee. Elias chuckled and poured her a mug, sliding it across the table. There you go. The magic cure. For a while, they sat in silence, sipping coffee and listening to the low hum of the refrigerator. It should have been peaceful. It had been peaceful just a week ago. But now the silence felt heavy, almost suffocating, like they were both carefully avoiding the same subject. Later that day, Claire decided to go for a walk to clear her head. The town was small and quiet, with only a handful of streets winding between weathered houses and little shops. She walked past the bakery, where the smell of fresh bread drifted through the open door, and past the park, where two children played on a rusty swing set. Everything looked so normal. So simple. She wished she could feel simple too. At the edge of town, she reached the river. The water moved lazily, reflecting the gray sky. Claire sat on the grassy bank, hugging her knees to her chest. What is wrong with me? She whispered to the empty air. Elias was her uncle. He was family. She wasn't supposed to feel this way. Not about him, not about anyone in her family. But the truth was undeniable. Her heart raced when he smiled at her. Her skin tingled when their hands brushed. And late at night, when the house was quiet and she was alone with her thoughts, the feelings grew too big to ignore. A tear slid down her cheek. She wiped it away angrily. This has to stop. You can't go on like this, Claire. You'll ruin everything. When she returned to the house, Elias was sitting on the porch, a cold beer in his hand. His gaze softened when he saw her, and he patted the step beside him. Rough day? He asked. Claire hesitated before sitting down. Just thinking. About what? She wanted to say you. The word was right there, heavy on her tongue. But instead, she shook her head. About the future. College. Life. Everything. Elias took a slow sip of his beer, his eyes fixed on the horizon. When I was your age, I thought I had everything figured out. Turns out, life has a way of throwing you curveballs. Claire glanced at him, curious. Like what? He chuckled, but there was no humor in it. Oh, you know, falling in love with the wrong person. Making choices you can't take back. Waking up one day and realizing you've become someone you don't even recognize. His voice was quiet, almost bitter. Claire's chest tightened. Did you regret it? She asked softly. Elias was silent for a long moment. Finally, he said, every day. But regrets don't change the past. They just haunt you. His words sent a shiver down Claire's spine. She wanted to ask who he had fallen in love with, what he had done that left him sounding so broken. But before she could, he stood and stretched, forcing a smile. Come on. Let's get dinner started before I get too philosophical. Claire followed him inside, but her mind was spinning. His confession felt like a warning, one she didn't fully understand yet. That night, Claire lay awake again, staring at the ceiling. She could hear Elias moving around in his room down the hall. The creak of the floorboards, the soft thud of a drawer closing. It was maddening, knowing he was so close, just a few steps away. Her thoughts swirled like the river current, pulling her deeper and deeper. She tried to think of other things, her mother, her friends back home, her plans for college, but everything came back to him. And then, like a whisper in the dark, a single dangerous thought rose to the surface. What if he's struggling too? What if he feels this too, but he's just as scared as I am? The idea was both terrifying and intoxicating. Claire turned onto her side, clutching her pillow. She didn't know how much longer she could keep pretending. The next morning, she came downstairs to find Elias already dressed, keys in hand. I need to run into town for a bit, he said. Want to come with me? Claire hesitated. She should have said no. She should have stayed home, safe, away from the confusing tangle of emotions between them. But instead, she nodded. Yeah, I'll come. As they drove down the narrow country road, the air between them felt charged, like the moment before a storm. Neither of them spoke, but Claire could feel it. Something was building. Something that couldn't be ignored much longer. The drive into town was quiet, almost too quiet. The only sounds were the steady hum of the truck's engine and the rhythmic swipe of the windshield wipers clearing away the thin mist clinging to the glass. Claire sat in the passenger seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her heart beating far too fast for such an ordinary morning. She could feel Elias's presence beside her, the solidness of him, the warmth radiating from his body, and it made her pulse quicken in ways she didn't understand, or maybe didn't want to understand. He looked calm, his gaze fixed on the winding road ahead, but there was a tension in his jaw, a quiet heaviness in the way his fingers gripped the steering wheel. Claire glanced at him out of the corner of her eye. He was so close. If she reached out, she could touch his hand. She could slide her fingers into his, and she jerked her gaze to the window, scolding herself silently. Stop it, Claire. Stop. They reached town just as the sun broke through the clouds, painting the wet streets in soft gold. Elias parked in front of the hardware store, cutting the engine. Won't take long, he said. You can wait here if you want. Claire shook her head quickly. I'll come with you. Inside, the store smelled faintly of sawdust and paint. Elias chatted with the clerk about supplies while Claire wandered the narrow aisles, running her fingers along the shelves. It should have been boring, but her mind wouldn't stop replaying the events of the past few days, the lingering glances, the quiet moments charged with something unspoken. When Elias found her, he was carrying a small bag and wearing that easy smile she'd always loved. Ready to go, kiddo? He asked. The word kiddo landed like a slap. It was a reminder of what she was supposed to be to him. Just a niece. Just a girl. Yeah, she said, forcing a smile of her own. As they walked back to the truck, Elias reached out instinctively to steady her when she slipped on a wet patch of pavement. His hand closed around her arm, firm and warm. The contact lasted only a second, but it sent a shiver racing through Claire's entire body. Elias froze too, his thumb brushing her skin before he quickly let go. For a split second, their eyes met, his dark and unreadable, hers wide and full of confusion. Careful, he said softly, almost hoarsely. Then he turned away and opened her door for her, his movements a little too sharp, a little too controlled. The ride home was even quieter than before. Claire stared out the window, her reflection ghostly against the glass. Her mind screamed at her to say something, to break the silence, to pretend nothing was wrong. but her throat felt tight, her voice locked away somewhere she couldn't reach. When they finally pulled into the driveway, Elias shut off the engine and sat there for a moment, his hands still gripping the steering wheel. "Claire," he said finally, his voice low. "We need to talk." Her stomach flipped. "About what?" Elias turned to face her. His expression was serious, almost pained. "About us." The word hung in the air like a live wire. Claire's breath caught. "There is no us," she said quickly, the denial sharp and shaky all at once. "Exactly." Elias ran a hand through his hair, his frustration evident. "There can't be an us. You know that." "I know that." Claire swallowed hard. "Then why does it feel like there is?" Elias closed his eyes for a moment, like her words had struck him physically. When he opened them again, his gaze was full of something raw and unguarded. "Because," he said softly, "I'm weak. And you're not a little girl anymore." Her breath came in short, shaky bursts. "Elias." He reached for her hand, then stopped himself at the last second, curling his fingers into a fist. "We have to stop this before it goes any further. You deserve better than this mess." For the rest of the day, they barely spoke. Claire stayed in her room, pretending to study while her heart raced and her thoughts spun in chaotic circles. She told herself she should be relieved. Elias had drawn a clear line. This was her chance to step back, to regain control of herself. But instead of relief, all she felt was an aching emptiness. When the sun set, the house seemed to grow smaller, darker. Claire wandered into the kitchen to make tea, only to find Elias already there, leaning against the counter with a glass of whiskey in his hand. His eyes met hers across the dimly lit room. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The air between them was thick with everything they weren't saying. Claire's breath caught as she realized something terrifying. The line Elias had drawn that morning was already blurring, and if they weren't careful, one night, one moment, would be enough to erase it completely. The rain had started just after sunset, a steady, relentless downpour that drummed against the roof and windows, filling the house with a muted, restless rhythm. The power flickered twice before finally holding steady, casting long shadows that danced across the living room walls. Claire sat curled up on the couch, a book open in her lap that she hadn't turned a page of in nearly an hour. Her eyes kept drifting toward the hallway, toward the faint light spilling from the kitchen where Elias moved around quietly. She could hear the clink of ice in a glass, the low rumble of him humming an old country tune under his breath. She tried to focus on her book, tried to force her heart to slow down. But tonight felt different. There was a heaviness in the air, a kind of quiet that felt like the moment before a storm breaks. "Tea or whiskey?" Elias's voice came from the kitchen doorway, startling her. Claire looked up. He was leaning casually against the frame, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his hair slightly damp from the rain he'd run through earlier to cover the woodpile. In his hands were two glasses, one steaming with tea, the other amber with whiskey. "Tea, please," she said, her voice softer than she intended. He walked over and handed it to her, his fingers brushing hers just slightly. The warmth of the mug seared into her skin like a brand. "Thanks," she murmured, keeping her eyes down. Elias sank into the armchair opposite her, stretching his legs out. For a moment, they just sat there, the rain filling the silence between them. "You've been quiet today," he said finally. Claire swallowed, her throat tight. "So have you." He gave a small, rueful laugh. "Guess we're both guilty." The conversation drifted aimlessly for a while. Safe topics, weather, memories from when she was younger. But beneath the words was an undercurrent neither of them could ignore. At one point, Elias leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his voice softer now. "Claire, about what I said this morning." Her breath caught. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I just..." He broke off, shaking his head. "I'm trying to do the right thing here. For both of us." "I know," she whispered. "But it still hurts." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. A deep, aching truth neither dared to say aloud. Elias exhaled slowly, like he'd been holding his breath for hours. "I hate myself for this," he admitted. "For feeling like this. For wanting something I have no right to want." Claire's hands trembled around her mug. "You think you're the only one?" The words hung there, trembling in the space between them. The next flash of lightning lit up the entire room, casting sharp, fleeting shadows. In that brief, electric moment, Elias saw the tears welling in Claire's eyes, saw the way her lips parted like she was about to say something more but couldn't. And then he was on his feet, moving toward her before he could stop himself. "Claire," he said, his voice breaking. "Tell me to stop. Please." She looked up at him, her breath coming fast and uneven. I can't." That was all it took. Elias reached for her, his hands cradling her face as if she were something fragile and priceless. His lips met hers, tentative at first, then with a sudden desperate hunger that neither of them could fight anymore. Claire clung to him like a drowning woman, every rational thought drowned out by the pounding of her heart. The taste of whiskey and salt. The feel of his rough hands sliding into her hair. The low, ragged sound he made when she kissed him back. It was wrong. It was dangerous. It was everything. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathless, trembling. "This is insane," Elias muttered, pressing his forehead to hers. We shouldn't." "I know," Claire whispered, tears streaking down her cheeks. "But I don't care." He closed his eyes, his chest rising and falling rapidly. For a long, terrible moment, neither of them moved. Then, wordlessly, Elias scooped her into his arms and carried her down the hall, their bodies pressed tightly together as if trying to erase the space between them. Much later, when the storm had passed and the house was silent again, Claire lay tangled in the sheets, staring at the ceiling. Elias slept beside her, one arm draped possessively over her waist. Her body still hummed with the memory of his touch, but her mind was a mess of fear and guilt and longing. She turned her head to look at him, her heart twisting painfully. There was no going back now. Whatever they had crossed tonight, it could never be undone. In the darkness, Claire whispered the truth she couldn't say in the light. "I love you." Elias stirred, his brow furrowing even in sleep, like he'd heard her. Outside, the first pale light of dawn began to break through the clouds, fragile and fleeting, just like the fragile, fleeting peace they'd found in each other's arms. The next morning, Claire woke up with a heaviness in her chest, the memory of last night clinging to her like smoke after a fire. She could still feel Eli's presence lingering in the air, the way his voice had sounded when he said her name, low and rough, as if it had been pulled from somewhere deep inside him. She pressed her hands to her face and let out a shaky breath. The cabin was quiet, too quiet. Usually, she would hear Eli moving around, making coffee, humming under his breath. But today, there was only silence. Claire sat up slowly, her heart pounding with unease. She tiptoed down the hallway and found a note on the kitchen table. It was scrawled in Eli's handwriting. "Had to take a drive. Back later. Don't wait up." The words were simple, but they felt like 1,000 questions left unanswered. Claire sank into a chair, staring at the note. She knew what had almost happened between them last night. She also knew that if Eli hadn't pulled away, she wouldn't have stopped him. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. She went about the day in a fog, trying to focus on chores, trying to keep herself busy, but her mind kept circling back to him. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the windows, she half hoped it was Eli coming home and half dreaded it. It was late afternoon when she finally heard the sound of his truck pulling up. Her heart jumped. She rushed to the window, then froze, suddenly unsure of what to say or how to act. Eli stepped out of the truck, his shoulders tense, his jaw tight. He didn't look at her as he came inside, just walked straight past her into the kitchen. Claire followed slowly, her stomach twisting in knots. "Eli," she said softly, her voice trembling. He stopped, but didn't turn around. "Claire, don't." The words sliced through her like a blade. "Don't what?" she asked, her throat tight. "Don't talk about it. Don't admit what we both felt last night." Eli turned then, his eyes burning with a mixture of anger and something far more dangerous. "You think I don't know what I felt?" he said, his voice low and ragged. "Claire, I haven't been able to think about anything else. But you're my niece. I'm supposed to protect you, not." He broke off, running a hand over his face. Claire took a shaky step closer. "You have protected me. You've been there for me when no one else was. And maybe that's why this happened. Maybe it's wrong, but her voice cracked, and she forced herself to continue. I don't want to pretend I don't feel what I feel. Last night, you stopped yourself, but if you hadn't, I wouldn't have stopped you either. The confession hung in the air like thunder before a storm. Eli stared at her, his chest rising and falling rapidly. You don't understand what you're saying, he said hoarsely. If we cross that line, there's no going back. People will judge us. They'll hate us. Hell, I'll hate myself. Claire's tears spilled over. I don't care what they think, she whispered. I just know that when I'm with you, I don't feel lost anymore. I feel safe. Whole. For a moment, Eli stood frozen, as if torn in two. Then, with a sound that was half a growl, half a plea, he crossed the space between them and grabbed her face in his hands. His mouth crashed against hers, and all the walls they had built between them came tumbling down. The kiss was wild, desperate, years of unspoken longing bursting free in one unstoppable wave. Claire clung to him, her fingers tangling in his hair, as if letting go would mean losing him forever. When they finally broke apart, gasping for breath, Eli rested his forehead against hers. God forgive me, he murmured. I can't fight this anymore. Then don't, Claire breathed, her heart pounding. Don't fight it, Eli. Please. And in that quiet cabin, with the world far away and only the storm outside to witness them, they surrendered to the fire that had been smoldering between them for so long, knowing that nothing would ever be the same again. The light of dawn crept slowly through the curtains, soft and pale, casting golden streaks across the wooden floorboards. Claire stirred awake, her body aching in ways both tender and new. For a moment, she didn't move. She just lay there, breathing in the warm, lingering scent of Eli on the sheets, the heavy weight of what they had done settling over her like a blanket she wasn't ready to pull away. Last night felt like a fever dream. The kind of night that rewrote everything without asking permission. Claire rolled onto her side and found Eli lying beside her, his eyes closed, his face finally unguarded. He looked younger like this, almost vulnerable, and it made her heart squeeze painfully. For a few blissful seconds, she allowed herself to simply watch him breathe. But then reality began to creep back in. The questions. The fear. The knowledge that the world beyond these walls wouldn't understand what they had done, what they had become. Eli stirred, his lashes fluttering before his eyes opened. He looked at her, and for a moment, there was only softness in his gaze, a tenderness that made Claire's chest ache. But then, like a storm rolling over clear skies, his expression shifted, darkened. Morning, he said, his voice low and rough. Morning, she whispered, clutching the blanket closer to her chest as if it could shield her from what was coming. Eli sat up slowly, his broad shoulders tense. He dragged a hand down his face and let out a heavy sigh. Claire, about last night. Don't, she said quickly, panic flaring in her chest. Please don't take it back. Don't tell me it was a mistake. His eyes closed briefly, as if her words hurt him. It wasn't a mistake, he admitted hoarsely. God help me, it wasn't. But that doesn't mean it wasn't wrong. Claire sat up, her hands trembling. Wrong to who? To people who don't know us? Who don't understand what we've been through? Eli, we didn't plan this. It just happened. It felt real, and it felt right. He turned to her then, his eyes burning with conflict. You think I don't want you? His voice cracked, raw with emotion. Claire, I've wanted you every second of every day since the moment you walked back into my life. But wanting you doesn't change what we are. If anyone ever found out. Tears welled in Claire's eyes, blurring her vision. Then we don't let them find out. We keep this between us. We can figure it out, Eli. Please don't walk away from me now. Eli stared at her for a long, agonizing moment. Finally, he shook his head and stood, pacing the room like a caged animal. You don't understand, he muttered, his hands fisting at his sides. It's not just about other people. It's about me. I'm supposed to be better than this. I'm supposed to protect you, not. He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Claire's heart shattered at the sight of him breaking apart in front of her. She slipped out of bed, the cool morning air hitting her skin like ice, and crossed the space between them. Eli, she whispered, reaching for his hands. You are protecting me. You've always been my safe place, even when everything else fell apart. Last night, it wasn't wrong. It was the only thing in my life that's ever made perfect sense. His breath hitched as he looked at her, his defenses crumbling. Claire, he began, but she silenced him with a kiss, soft and trembling. For a moment, he didn't move. Then he kissed her back, pulling her against him as if she were the only thing keeping him upright. When they broke apart, foreheads pressed together, Eli's voice was barely a whisper. We can't keep doing this, he said. Claire's tears slid silently down her cheeks. I know, she said, even though her heart screamed the opposite. But last night was ours, Eli. No one can take that away. They stood there in the quiet, the morning sun creeping higher, knowing that the world outside was waiting, and that it would never, ever understand. The next few days were a blur of silence and unspoken words. Claire and Eli moved around each other carefully, like two ghosts haunting the same house. Whenever their eyes met, 1,000 memories of that night would rush between them, raw and burning, but neither of them dared to speak it aloud. Eli busied himself with work around the cabin and long drives into town. Claire stayed close to the house, trying to distract herself with books, with chores, with anything that might drown out the ache inside her chest. But every creak of the floorboards, every rumble of his truck returning, sent her heart racing. On the third evening, she found herself standing at the window as the sun dipped low behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and gold. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering even though the air was warm. She hated this distance, hated feeling like a stranger in the only place she'd ever felt at home. When Eli finally walked through the door, Claire couldn't hold back anymore. Eli, she said, her voice trembling. He paused, his hands still on the doorframe, but didn't meet her eyes. What is it? We can't keep doing this, she whispered. At that, he finally looked at her. His face was drawn, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion and something that looked a lot like pain. Doing what? He asked, though they both knew exactly what she meant. This, Claire said, gesturing between them. Pretending like nothing happened. Pretending like we don't feel what we feel. It's tearing me apart, Eli. Her voice broke, and she covered her mouth with a trembling hand. Eli's jaw tightened. He crossed the room in 2 long strides and grabbed her hands, pulling them gently away from her face. Claire, listen to me, he said, his voice rough but steady. What happened that night? It can't happen again. It was, he faltered, looking away for a moment before forcing himself to continue. It was the most beautiful thing I've ever known. And it was wrong. God, it was so wrong. Claire shook her head violently, tears spilling over. Don't say that. Don't you dare call it wrong. You said it yourself, it was beautiful. It was real. And I won't sit here and let you erase it. He flinched as if she'd struck him. I'm not erasing it, Eli said quietly. I'll never forget it. I'll carry it with me until the day I die. But Claire, if anyone ever found out, they'd destroy us. They'd destroy you. Her breath came in ragged gasps. You think I care about them? About their judgment? Eli, all I care about is you. About us. He closed his eyes, a muscle ticking in his jaw. You don't know what you're saying. The world doesn't forgive things like this. Claire reached up and cupped his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. Then let them hate us, she said fiercely. Let them whisper and point and turn their backs. I don't care. I'd rather be hated and have you than be loved and live a lie. Eli's breath caught, and for a moment, the wall he'd built between them seemed ready to crumble again. But then he stepped back, shaking his head as if trying to clear it. You're young, he said hoarsely. You think this is love because it's intense, because it's forbidden. But one day, you'll see it for what it is, a mistake. The words cut deeper than he intended, and Claire staggered back like he'd physically pushed her. Her lips trembled, but she refused to let the tears fall. You don't get to tell me what I feel, she whispered, her voice breaking. You don't get to decide what this is for me. Before Eli could respond, there was a sudden knock on the door. They froze. Claire's heart lurched into her throat. No one ever came out here, not this late. Eli's eyes met hers, wide and alarmed, before he turned and opened the door. Standing on the porch was a man neither of them had expected to see again. A man who carried with him the weight of their shared past and the power to unravel everything they'd fought to keep hidden. "Evening, Eli," the man said with a cold smile. "Mind if I come in?" The air in the cabin turned to ice. Claire's breath caught, and for the first time since that night, she realized just how fragile their secret really was, and how easily it could all come crashing down. Eli's hand lingered on the doorknob, his knuckles white, his jaw locked tight. For a heartbeat, he didn't move, didn't breathe, as though by standing perfectly still he could undo what was happening, could send the man at the door back into the shadows where he belonged. But the past had a cruel way of finding you, no matter how far you ran. "Evening, Eli," the man repeated, his voice smooth and mocking. What, no warm welcome for an old friend? Claire stood frozen several feet behind Eli, her pulse thundering in her ears. She didn't know who this man was, but the tension in Eli's body told her everything she needed to know. This wasn't someone he wanted to see. Not now. Not ever. Eli finally managed a rough, "What the hell are you doing here, Mark?" Mark's smirk widened, his eyes glinting with something sharp and dangerous. "Passing through. Thought I'd check in, see how my old buddy was holding up out here in the middle of nowhere." His gaze drifted past Eli and landed on Claire. He tilted his head, studying her with a predator's curiosity. "And who might this be?" Eli shifted his body subtly, blocking Mark's view of her. "She's family," he said flatly. "That's all you need to know." The word family stung, but Claire stayed silent, her breath trapped in her throat. Mark chuckled low in his throat. "Family, huh? Funny, I don't remember you having anyone around last time we crossed paths. Seems to me you were pretty damn alone back then." "Things change," Eli said through gritted teeth. "Now, what do you want, Mark? Because if you're here to stir up trouble, you can turn right around and leave." Mark took a slow step forward, crossing the threshold uninvited. The air in the cabin grew heavy, thick with unspoken history. "Trouble," Mark said, feigning innocence. "Me? I'm just here to talk. Catch up. Maybe reminisce a little." Eli's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Get to the point." Mark's smile sharpened. "All right. Point is, I know you, Eli. I know the things you've done, the choices you've made to survive. And I've been thinking a man like you owes me. Big time." Claire's heart lurched. She had no idea what Mark was talking about, but the look on Eli's face, pale, grim, defeated, told her it was bad. "You're out of your damn mind," Eli growled. "Maybe." Mark shrugged, unbothered. "But you see, out here in the sticks, there's not much to keep a man entertained. So when I caught wind of a certain secret you've been keeping," his gaze slid past Eli again, landing squarely on Claire. "Well, let's just say I got curious." Claire's breath hitched audibly. Eli stepped forward, his body tense and dangerous. "Don't. You don't even say her name." Mark raised his hands in mock surrender, but the smirk never left his face. "Relax, friend. I'm not here to hurt anyone. Not unless you give me a reason to." He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping to a whisper meant only for Eli. "But secrets have a way of costing people, don't they?" Eli's chest heaved, rage and fear warring inside him. "Whatever you think you know," he said low and deadly, "you don't." Mark laughed, a sound as cold as the night air seeping through the open door. "Oh, I know plenty. I know why you disappeared from the world. I know why you built this little hideaway out here, far away from prying eyes. And I know," his gaze flickered to Claire again, "that you've got something, someone worth protecting now. Which means, Eli, I've got leverage." Claire's stomach twisted, a sickening mix of dread and confusion. She didn't understand the history between these two men, but she understood one thing very clearly. Mark was dangerous, and he knew far too much. "Get out," Eli said, his voice breaking like a snapped branch. Mark didn't move. "You don't really want me to do that," he said softly. "Because if I leave, maybe I start talking. Maybe I wander into town, share a story or two. About you. About her." Claire's knees nearly gave out. Her vision tunneled, narrowing on Eli's face, which was now a mask of barely contained fury. "What do you want?" Eli finally bit out. Mark's grin was a thing of pure malice. "That's more like it. We'll discuss the details later. For now, he tipped an imaginary hat to Claire, his tone mocking. Lovely to meet you, miss. I can see why he's so invested. With that, he turned and strolled casually back into the night, whistling a haunting tune as he disappeared into the darkness. The door slammed shut, rattling the cabin walls. Eli stood there, breathing hard, his back to Claire. For a long, unbearable moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Claire's voice broke the silence, small and trembling. Eli, what was that? Who was that man? Eli didn't turn around. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw, guttural. That, he said, was the past I've been trying to outrun. And now it's found us. Claire's blood ran cold. Because for the first time, she realized their forbidden love wasn't just a secret. It was a weapon someone could use to destroy them both. The cabin felt colder after Mark left, even though the fire still crackled in the hearth. Claire stood frozen in place, her hands trembling at her sides. Eli hadn't moved either. He stood with his back to her, shoulders hunched, like a man bearing a crushing weight he couldn't set down. Eli, she whispered, her voice breaking. Please talk to me. Tell me who he is. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to scan the dark tree line outside. Only when he was certain Mark was gone did he turn to face her. His eyes were haunted, his face pale and drawn. He's someone I used to know, Eli said at last, his tone flat, almost lifeless. Someone I hoped I'd never see again. Claire's throat tightened. But why was he here? He looked at me like... Her voice faltered. She couldn't bring herself to finish the sentence. Eli's fists clenched. Because he knows too much. About me. About us. Claire's breath caught in her chest. She'd always known their relationship was risky, a line they'd crossed and could never uncross, but this was different. This was dangerous. Eli, she said, her voice trembling. What kind of man is he? Eli's jaw flexed. For a moment, he seemed ready to shut her out completely. Then, with a weary sigh, he sank into the worn leather armchair near the fire. The kind of man who doesn't care who he hurts, as long as he gets what he wants, Eli said quietly. Mark and we go way back. We grew up in the same small town. He was trouble even then. Lies, fights, petty thefts. I tried to stay out of it, but somehow, he always managed to drag me in. Claire moved closer, kneeling at his side. What happened between you two? Eli's gaze drifted to the flames, as if the fire itself could burn away the memories. When I was younger, I made a mistake. A bad one. Mark helped me cover it up, but he never let me forget it. Over the years, he used it to control me, to keep me under his thumb. I thought moving out here would finally put an end to it. I thought, his voice cracked. I thought if I built a life far away from everyone, it would stay buried. Claire's heart ached. She reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. And now he's back. Eli nodded once, a harsh, jerking motion. And now he's back. Silence fell between them, heavy and suffocating. Claire's mind spun, trying to piece together the fragments of Eli's story. She didn't know what mistake he'd made, but she could feel the depth of his guilt, his fear. It terrified her to think of what Mark might do with that power. What does he want from you? She asked softly. Eli's lips pressed into a grim line. I don't know yet. Money, maybe. Or leverage. But one thing's for sure, he's not going to leave us alone. Claire swallowed hard. Us, she echoed, her voice fragile. You mean me too. Eli's eyes met hers, and the pain in them was almost unbearable. Especially you. Her chest constricted, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. She'd known from the start that what they had was forbidden, but she'd never thought someone else might use it against them. It wasn't just about judgment or shame anymore. It was about survival. We can't let him, she said fiercely, surprising herself with the strength in her own voice. Eli, we can't let him tear us apart. Eli cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears she hadn't realized were falling. I won't, he vowed. But, Claire, you have to understand. Mark is dangerous. If he even suspects how much you mean to me. Claire silenced him with a kiss, desperate and trembling. When she pulled back, she whispered, then we don't give him that power. We stay strong. Together. For the first time all night, Eli's expression softened. Together, he agreed. But even as he held her, Eli's mind was racing. He'd spent years trying to outrun his past, and now it had come crashing through their door. And deep down, he knew one terrible truth. You can't hide forever. Somewhere out there, Mark was planning his next move. And when he came back, Eli would have to choose between protecting the woman he loved and keeping the darkness buried where it belonged. Either way, someone would pay the price. The night stretched long and heavy, a silence settling over the cabin, so deep that even the whisper of wind outside seemed ominous. Claire sat curled on the worn couch, staring at the fire as it burned lower and lower, until the flames became nothing but glowing embers. Eli hadn't said much since Mark left. He'd checked the locks 3 times, drawn every curtain, then sat at the table with his head in his hands. Claire's mind churned restlessly, replaying Mark's visit over and over. The way he'd smiled, too sharp, too knowing. The way Eli had gone pale at the sight of him. And the way Eli's voice had cracked when he said Mark knew too much. She finally broke the silence. "Eli," she said softly, "you have to tell me what happened back then. Whatever it was, I need to understand." Eli didn't look up. His fingers dug into his scalp, his shoulders rigid. "You don't need to know," he muttered. "The less you know, the safer you'll be." Claire's throat tightened. Safer from what? From him? "Eli, if this man is dangerous, don't you think I deserve to know why?" He flinched, like her words had struck him. Slowly, he raised his head, and the raw anguish in his eyes made her heart ache. "You don't understand," he said hoarsely. "If I tell you, you'll look at me differently. You'll see me the way he does. Like I'm tainted. Like I'm not worth." "Stop," Claire interrupted sharply, tears springing to her eyes. She crossed the room and knelt in front of him, taking his face in her hands. "Nothing you could say would make me see you that way. Nothing. Do you hear me?" For a moment, he just stared at her, searching for any trace of doubt. Finally, with a shuddering breath, he nodded. "Back then," Eli began, his voice barely above a whisper, "I was just a stupid kid. 17. Angry at the world, ready to run wild. Mark and we hung out with a rough crowd. Fights, petty crimes, drinking until we blacked out. It felt like freedom, like we were invincible." He paused, his gaze distant, as if he were watching it play out all over again. "One night, there was this party," he continued. "Things got out of hand. A fight broke out between Mark and another guy. I tried to break it up, but someone shoved me. There was shouting, pushing, broken glass. And then Eli's voice faltered. Then the other guy went down. Hard. Too hard." Claire's stomach twisted. "Was he?" Eli nodded slowly. "Gone. Just like that. One second he was screaming, the next he wasn't breathing at all." Claire's hands trembled as she gripped his. "Oh my God." "Mark panicked," Eli said. "We both did. But instead of calling the cops, he convinced me we had to hide it. Said no one would believe it was an accident. Said we'd go to prison." I was terrified, and I listened to him. Eli's breathing grew ragged. "We buried the truth that night. Literally. Mark swore no one would ever find out, but he made me promise I'd owe him for the rest of my life, that I'd do whatever he asked. And for years I did." Claire felt sick, her heart pounding so hard it hurt. She could picture it all, the reckless youth, the bad decisions, the terrible mistake that had chained Eli to Mark forever. But eventually, Eli went on, "I couldn't take it anymore. The guilt, the constant fear. So I left town, came out here, and tried to start over. I thought if I built a quiet life, stayed off the radar, it would all stay buried." Claire swallowed hard. "And now Mark's here because he wants to drag you back." Eli's jaw tightened. "Exactly. He must need something big this time. Money, a favor, I don't know. But whatever it is, he's willing to use our past, and you, to get it." Claire's breath caught. "Me. He saw how I reacted when he showed up tonight," Eli said bitterly. "He's no fool. He knows you matter to me. Which means he'll try to use you against me." A cold chill crept over Claire's skin. "Eli, what if he already knows? What if he figures out what we are to each other?" Eli surged to his feet, pacing like a caged animal. Then it's over. He'll have us completely. He'll destroy us, Claire. Her vision blurred with tears. So what do we do? For a moment, Eli didn't answer. Then, with a deadly calm she'd never heard from him before, he said, "We fight back." Claire blinked. Fight back? How? Eli turned to her, and there was a grim determination in his eyes. I've been running from this for years. It ends now. Whatever Mark is planning, I need to get ahead of it. That means finding out why he's really here and stopping him before he can hurt you. Claire's heart thudded painfully in her chest. She'd never seen Eli like this, fierce, unyielding, ready to face the darkness head-on. But even as she clung to his resolve, a seed of dread took root inside her. Because Mark wasn't the kind of man who gave up easily. And she knew, deep down, that once this fight began, there would be no going back. Outside, somewhere in the shadows beyond the cabin, a twig snapped. Eli froze. Claire's breath caught in her throat. And just like that, they both knew. Mark hadn't gone far at all. The night outside the cabin was suffocatingly still, the kind of silence that made every sound feel magnified. Claire's heart hammered as the sharp crack of a twig echoed through the darkness. Eli raised a hand, silently signaling her to stay put. His body was tense, his breath shallow, like a predator sensing danger. "Stay here," he whispered, his voice low but firm. "No," Claire hissed back, grabbing his arm. "Eli, you can't go out there alone." He turned to her, his face shadowed by the dim glow of the dying fire. "If it's him, I won't let him near you." His jaw tightened. "I'd rather take the risk myself." Claire's grip tightened. "Please don't do this. If something happens to you." "Claire." His voice softened, breaking just slightly. "I can't lose you. Not again." Tears stung her eyes, but before she could answer, another sound cut through the night. A low crunch of boots on dry leaves, closer this time. Claire's breath caught. Eli grabbed the old hunting rifle he kept by the door, his knuckles white around the stock. He eased the door open a fraction of an inch and peered into the darkness. The weak moonlight revealed little more than shifting shadows. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then a figure emerged from the tree line. Mark. He stood just beyond the porch, his face half hidden under the brim of his cap, a smirk curling his lips. Well, he drawled, his voice carrying easily in the still night. "Didn't mean to startle you folks. Thought I'd just drop by for a late-night chat." Eli stepped outside, positioning himself between Mark and the doorway. "You need to leave," he said, his voice cold and steady. "Whatever you're trying to pull, it ends tonight." Mark chuckled, a low, mocking sound. "Ends tonight? Oh, Eli, you really think you're the one calling the shots here?" Claire hovered near the doorway, her fingers digging into the wood. Fear and fury tangled in her chest. She wanted to scream at Mark, to tell him to leave them alone, but the sheer menace radiating off him kept her silent. "What do you want?" Eli demanded. Mark tilted his head, his eyes glinting like a predator's. "You know what I want. Same thing I've always wanted, your loyalty. Your cooperation. Let's call it that." Eli's grip tightened on the rifle. "I don't owe you anything anymore." Mark's smirk deepened. "You owe me everything. Or did you forget the night in the woods?" "Because I sure didn't." Claire's stomach lurched. She could feel Eli's shame and rage pouring off him in waves. "That was an accident," Eli said through gritted teeth. "We were kids. It was chaos." "An accident?" Mark's laugh was harsh and ugly. "Tell that to the boy's family." "Oh, wait, you can't. Because you helped me bury him." Claire gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Even though Eli had told her the story earlier, hearing it spoken aloud, thrown in his face like a weapon, was a different kind of pain. She saw Eli flinch, his entire body trembling with barely contained fury. Mark took a step closer, his voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "See, here's the thing. I've been real patient all these years. Kept my mouth shut. But patience runs out. And now I've got a little job that needs doing, and you're going to help me." Eli's eyes blazed. "No. Whatever it is, no." Mark's gaze slid past Eli, landing on Claire in the doorway. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. "Maybe you don't care about yourself. But her? Now that's a different story." Claire's blood turned to ice. Don't you dare, she choked out, her voice shaking. Mark ignored her, keeping his eyes locked on Eli. Help me, or I tell everyone what you did. And while I'm at it, maybe I mention that pretty little thing you've been keeping hidden away here. What do you think people would say about that? Eli's face drained of color. You stay away from her, he snarled, taking a step forward. Mark held up his hands mockingly. Relax, cousin. I'm just saying, secrets have a way of spilling out. Unless you give me a reason to keep them locked up nice and tight. Claire's mind spun. Cousin. The word echoed in her head like a gunshot. She stared at Eli, searching his face for an answer, a denial, anything. Cousin, she whispered, her voice breaking. Eli, what is he talking about? Eli turned, his expression stricken. Claire, his voice caught, and for a moment, he couldn't speak. Mark's laughter cut through the night. Oh, she doesn't know? Oh, this just keeps getting better. Shut up, Eli roared, his voice raw with desperation. But it was too late. The truth was out there now, a jagged wound between them. Claire stumbled back, her world tilting on its axis. No, she breathed. No, this can't be true. Claire, please, Eli begged, reaching for her. It's not what you think. I was going to tell you, I swear, but... She jerked away from him like his touch burned. Don't you dare touch me. Mark's grin was wide and gleaming in the moonlight. Well, isn't this cozy? A family reunion and a love story all rolled into one. You really can't make this stuff up. Eli swung the rifle toward him, fury and heartbreak twisting his features. You have 5 seconds to leave, Mark. 5. Mark didn't move. He just stood there, smiling that infuriating, knowing smile. Tick-tock, he murmured. Your call, Eli. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, from deep in the woods, another sound echoed, a distant engine, growing louder, closer. Mark's smile faltered. Eli's head snapped toward the sound, then back to Mark. You're done here, he growled. Go. Now. Mark's eyes narrowed, calculating. Then, with a slow, deliberate step backward, he disappeared into the shadows of the trees, his voice floating back to them like a promise. This isn't over. Not by a long shot. The forest swallowed him whole, leaving only the distant hum of the approaching vehicle and the shattering silence he left behind. Claire turned to Eli, her face pale and streaked with tears. Tell me it's not true, she whispered. Please, Eli. Tell me he's lying. Eli opened his mouth, but no words came. And in that moment of silence, Claire knew. The truth was worse than she had ever imagined. The approaching engine roared closer, its low growl breaking the tense silence that had fallen over the cabin. Claire stood frozen, her chest rising and falling in ragged breaths, while Eli remained motionless, gripping the rifle like it was the only thing holding him upright. Eli, she whispered, her voice trembling. Say something. Please. But Eli couldn't look at her. He couldn't even move. The way she was staring at him, with hurt, betrayal, disbelief, cut deeper than any wound Mark had ever inflicted. The rumble of the engine grew louder until headlights swept through the trees, casting wild, swinging shadows across the clearing. A battered pickup truck rolled into view, its tires crunching over the gravel. Eli swore under his breath and lowered the rifle slightly. It's the old ranger, he muttered. Probably making his rounds. Claire blinked through her tears. The ranger? Eli nodded stiffly. He checks these roads sometimes. I'll handle it. But when Eli stepped toward the door, Claire reached out instinctively, grabbing his arm. No, she said, her voice breaking. You're not walking away from this. Not after what he just said. Eli froze, then slowly turned back to her. His eyes were haunted, his face pale in the dim light. Claire, he said softly, almost pleading. I need you to trust me. She let out a choked, bitter laugh. Trust you? You've been lying to me from the start. His flinch was sharp, almost physical. I wasn't lying. I couldn't tell you everything yet. Not until I knew how to. Not until what? She demanded, her voice rising. Until Mark forced your hand? Until it all blew up in our faces. The truck came to a stop outside, its engine idling. A door creaked open. Footsteps crunched on the gravel. Eli, a gruff voice called. You in there? Eli swallowed hard, dragging a hand over his face. Stay here, he said again, then slipped out the door before she could argue. Claire stood in the middle of the cabin, her body trembling. Through the thin walls, she heard muffled voices, Eli's low and urgent, the ranger's calm and steady. She couldn't make out the words, but she could hear the strain in Eli's tone, the way he was fighting to keep it together. Her mind whirled. Cousin. The word felt poisonous on her tongue. It twisted everything between them into something ugly and wrong. And yet, the memory of their nights together burned in her veins. The way he'd held her, the way he'd whispered her name like a prayer, none of it had felt wrong. It had felt like the only thing that had ever been real. Her stomach churned. She wanted to scream, to run, to undo every choice that had led her here. But at the same time, the thought of leaving Eli tore at her like claws. The door opened again. Eli stepped inside, closing it quietly behind him. His face was set in grim lines. He's gone, Eli said. Just wanted to make sure we were safe with all the recent break-ins around here. Claire's laugh was sharp, bitter. Safe, she repeated. You think we're safe? Eli's jaw tightened. For now. She stared at him, tears welling again. You didn't deny it, she whispered. You didn't tell me Mark was lying. Eli's shoulders sagged. He looked so tired, so broken, that for a moment, her anger wavered. But the silence between them stretched like a chasm, and she knew, deep down, that the truth was exactly what she feared. Claire, he began, his voice rough. Listen to me. What Mark said, it's complicated. Complicated, she cut in, her voice cracking. Eli, he said we're family. Eli closed his eyes. Pain etched across his face. My mother's sister, she's your mother. That makes us cousins by blood. But Claire, you have to understand, I never thought of you that way. Not once. Claire staggered back like he'd struck her. You knew, she breathed. You knew and you still. Yes, he said fiercely, his eyes flashing. Because I love you, Claire. Because I've loved you for as long as I can remember, and I couldn't stop it even if I wanted to. Her breath caught, a sob clawing up her throat. You don't get to say that to me, she cried. You don't get to make this some kind of tragic love story. You should have told me the truth before we. Her voice broke entirely. She turned away, pressing a trembling hand to her mouth to stifle the sobs threatening to tear free. Eli moved toward her, then stopped himself, his hands clenching at his sides. I wanted to tell you, he said hoarsely. God, I wanted to. But every time I looked at you, I was terrified. Terrified that you'd leave, that you'd hate me. Claire spun on him, her eyes wild with grief. You should have been terrified of what you were doing to me. You let me fall for you, Eli. You let me believe we had a future. We do have a future, he insisted, his voice breaking. We can leave this place, start over somewhere new. No one has to know. No one has to know, she repeated, her tone bitter. You think we can just run away and pretend we're not who we are? Claire, please, Eli begged, his eyes shining with desperation. You're all I have. If you leave me, His voice faltered and he turned away, his shoulders shaking. Claire stared at him, her own tears blurring the room into nothing but shapes and shadows. For a heartbeat, she wanted to go to him, to hold him, to pretend none of this had happened. But Mark's cruel voice echoed in her head, a reminder of how fragile their world really was. Someone's going to get hurt, she whispered, almost to herself. If we keep this up, someone's going to get hurt. Eli turned back to her, his expression fierce and raw. The only person who's going to get hurt is Mark, he said. I swear it, Claire. I'll protect you from him. From everything. But Claire wasn't sure anyone could protect them now. Not from Mark, not from the truth, not even from themselves. And as the first hints of dawn crept through the curtains, she realized with a sinking heart that their love wasn't just forbidden. It was doomed. The first light of dawn crept through the thin curtains, painting the cabin walls in a pale, ghostly glow. Claire sat on the edge of the bed, numb and sleepless, her eyes raw from crying. The world outside was quiet, but inside her chest, a storm raged that wouldn't let her rest. Eli moved silently around the room, throwing on a flannel shirt, lacing his boots with mechanical precision. His movements were sharp, almost violent, like each knot and button helped him keep control over something fraying inside. "You're leaving," Claire said flatly. It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. Eli froze, his back to her. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then, without turning around, he said, "I have to. Mark's not going to stop unless I make him." Claire swallowed hard. Her throat felt like it had been scraped raw. "You think you can just handle him?" "Eli, he's dangerous. Last night proved that." He turned to face her, his eyes dark, determined, but shadowed with fear he couldn't completely hide. "I know what he is, Claire. I've known for years. That's why I can't let him keep holding this over me, over us." Her heart twisted painfully at the word us. It still felt too precious, too fragile to exist in the harsh light of day. She hugged her arms around herself, shivering despite the stuffy heat of the cabin. "What if he hurts you?" she whispered. "What if he hurts me?" Eli crossed the room in 2 strides and crouched in front of her, taking her trembling hands in his. "I won't let that happen," he said fiercely. "I'd die before I let him touch you." Her breath caught, tears welling again. She wanted to believe him so badly, wanted to cling to the promise in his voice. But last night had shown her just how deep Mark's cruelty ran, and how easily everything could crumble. "Don't go," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "Please, Eli. Don't leave me alone with this." His expression softened, and for a moment, the fierce protector melted away, leaving only the boy she'd grown up with, the man she'd given her heart to. He cupped her face, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "I don't want to leave you," he admitted, his voice thick. "But if I stay, Mark wins. If I face him now, maybe we get to have a future. Maybe we finally get free." Claire's sob escaped before she could stop it. She threw her arms around him, burying her face in his shoulder. He held her tightly, as if he could fuse their broken pieces back together by sheer force of will. For a long moment, they stayed like that, clinging to each other, drowning in the impossible love that bound them and broke them all at once. Finally, Eli pulled back just enough to press a trembling kiss to her forehead. "Wait for me," he whispered. "No matter what happens, just wait for me." And then he was gone, slipping out into the cold morning air before she could find the words to stop him. The hours crawled by like years. Claire paced the cabin, her nerves stretched to the breaking point. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of branches outside made her jump. She kept glancing at the window, half expecting to see Mark's cruel smile leering at her through the glass. When a soft knock came at the door, her heart nearly stopped. "Eli," she called, her voice shaking. There was no answer. The knock came again, firmer this time. Claire's breath came in quick, shallow gasps. She grabbed the heavy iron poker from beside the fireplace and crept toward the door, her bare feet silent on the worn wooden floor. "Who's there?" she demanded, forcing her voice to sound stronger than she felt. A pause. Then a voice, smooth, familiar, and terrifying. "Relax, sweetheart," Mark drawled. "It's just me." Claire's blood ran cold. Her grip on the poker tightened until her knuckles turned white. "Go away," she said, her voice trembling. "Eli isn't here." "Oh, I know," Mark replied, amusement lacing every word. "I saw him drive off. Figured it was a good time for a little heart-to-heart." "Leave," she choked out. "Please." "Now, why would I do that," he said, "when you and I have so much to talk about?" The doorknob rattled. Claire stumbled back, her chest heaving. She wanted to scream, but fear had stolen her voice. "You're not opening this door?" Mark taunted. "That's fine. I can wait. Eli can't protect you forever." Claire's heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear his words. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the rattling stopped. Silence. She held her breath, straining to hear. Nothing. No footsteps retreating, no mocking laughter. Just emptiness. After what felt like an eternity, she forced herself to peek through the curtain. The clearing was empty. Claire sagged against the wall, shaking so hard she could barely stand. She didn't know if Mark had truly gone or if he was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And Eli, oh God, Eli, he had no idea what he was walking into. Miles away, Eli gripped the steering wheel so tightly his fingers ached. His truck rattled down the deserted back road, every mile taking him closer to the confrontation he'd been running from his entire life. He could still see Claire's face as he'd left her behind, pale and tear-streaked, her eyes wide with fear and love. That image burned in his chest like a brand, fueling his rage, his desperation. This ends tonight, he told himself. One way or another, Mark will never touch her again. But even as he repeated the vow, a tiny, traitorous voice whispered in the back of his mind. What if you can't stop him? What if you lose her anyway? Eli clenched his jaw, forcing the thought away. He couldn't afford doubt. Not now. The road curved, and up ahead, a familiar figure appeared, standing in the middle of the lane like he'd been waiting all along. Mark. Eli's foot slammed the brake pedal, the truck skidding to a halt. Gravel sprayed, dust rising in a choking cloud. Mark didn't flinch. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, smiling that same cruel, knowing smile. Morning, cousin. Mark called over the roar of the engine. Been waiting for you. Eli stepped out of the truck, every muscle coiled tight. This ends now, he said, his voice low and lethal. Mark's grin widened. Oh, I couldn't agree more. And in that charged, breathless moment, Eli understood. There was no going back. One of them wouldn't leave this road alive. The world seemed to hold its breath as Eli and Mark faced each other in the middle of that dusty back road. The morning sun cast long, jagged shadows across the gravel, and the air was thick with tension, heavy with years of hatred and unspoken truths. Eli's chest rose and fell in harsh, uneven breaths. His fists clenched at his sides, veins standing out like ropes beneath his skin. He'd imagined this moment 1,000 times. The day he'd finally stop running, stop hiding, and make Mark pay for every wound, every threat, every night Claire had cried herself to sleep out of fear. But now that it was here, it felt like stepping off a cliff. You always did have a flair for the dramatic, Mark drawled, his hands still shoved casually in his pockets, as if this was nothing more than a friendly chat. Charging down here like some kind of hero, thinking you can save the day. Eli took a step closer, his voice low and dangerous. I didn't come here to play games. You're going to leave Claire alone. You're going to leave me alone. For good. Mark laughed, a harsh, grating sound that made Eli's skin crawl. And if I don't? What then, Eli? You gonna kill me? He tilted his head, mockingly curious. Because that's what it'll take. And let's be honest, you don't have the guts. Eli's jaw tightened. His hands curled into fists, so tight his nails bit into his palms. Try me. For a moment, silence stretched between them, taut as a bowstring. Then Mark's smile turned sharp, venomous. You think this is about Claire, he said, his tone suddenly colder. But it's not. It never was. You've always been the golden boy, the one everyone loved, while I was… What? The screw-up? The problem child? The one they whispered about behind closed doors. Eli's throat tightened. You made your own choices, Mark. Don't blame me for what you've done. Oh, I will blame you, Mark snarled, stepping closer. His mask of amusement cracked, revealing the raw, festering anger underneath. Because it's always been you, Eli. Everything I wanted, you had first, respect, family her. Eli froze, his breath catching. Her. Mark's eyes glittered with cruel delight. Oh, don't play dumb. You really think Claire looks at you that way because of who you are? No. It's because you're the safe choice. The steady one. But deep down, he leaned in, his voice dropping to a poisonous whisper. Deep down she knows we're the same. That darkness in me? It's in you too. You just hide it better. Eli's entire body trembled, fury and revulsion twisting in his gut. You don't get to talk about her, he growled. Why not? Mark's grin widened. She's all you think about, isn't she? Every time you look at her, you want to protect her, and you want to ruin her. Admit it, Eli. Admit you're just like me. Something inside Eli snapped. With a guttural roar, he lunged. The two men collided in a flurry of fists and rage, crashing to the ground in a violent tangle. Gravel tore at their skin as they rolled, punching, grappling, each desperate to overpower the other. Mark fought dirty, claws and teeth and sudden vicious jabs, while Eli fought with the pure, relentless fury of a man who had nothing left to lose. "You won't touch her," Eli bellowed, slamming Mark's head against the ground. "You hear me?" "Never." Mark spat blood, laughing even as Eli's fists rained down. "Oh, Eli," he wheezed, his grin grotesque and red. "You're already too late." Back at the cabin, Claire paced like a caged animal. Every creak of the floorboards set her nerves jangling. She kept glancing at the door, half expecting it to burst open and reveal Eli, or worse, Mark. The memory of Mark's voice outside the cabin still haunted her, slick and poisonous. She couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, lurking just beyond the tree-line, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. When the wind rattled the window, Claire flinched so hard she nearly fell. She pressed a trembling hand to her chest, willing herself to breathe. "Please, Eli. Please come back to me." Her gaze fell on the small photograph sitting on the mantel, a faded snapshot of her and Eli from years ago, before everything had gone wrong. In it, they were laughing, carefree, their arms slung around each other's shoulders. A perfect illusion of innocence. Hot tears blurred her vision. That version of them was gone, lost to secrets and lies and the heavy weight of forbidden love. A sudden noise outside snapped her head up. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming closer. "Eli," she called, her voice cracking. Silence. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she grabbed the iron poker from beside the fireplace. "Who's there?" she demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. The door creaked open an inch. "Relax, sweetheart." Mark's voice oozed through the gap like oil. "It's just me." Claire's breath caught, terror flooding her veins. "No," she whispered, backing away. "You're lying. You're not supposed to be here." Mark pushed the door open wider, stepping into the cabin with a predator's grace. "Where's Eli?" he asked casually, as if they were discussing the weather. Claire shook her head violently. "Don't come any closer." He ignored her, his eyes roaming over her trembling form. "You know, he's always been so protective of you," Mark mused. "Almost possessive. Makes a man wonder what exactly he's protecting." Claire's grip on the poker tightened until her hands ached. "Get out," she screamed. Mark's smile widened, chilling her to the bone. "Oh, sweetheart," he said softly, "this is just getting started." On the back road, Eli finally managed to pin Mark to the ground, his forearm pressing against his cousin's throat. "This ends now," Eli snarled, his face inches from Mark's. Mark's laughter bubbled up, wet and ragged. "Go ahead," he rasped. "Kill me. Prove me right." Eli's vision blurred with rage and desperation. His muscles shook with the effort of holding back the killing blow. For a terrifying moment, he wasn't sure which part of him would win, the protector or the destroyer. Then, in the distance, a single, piercing scream tore through the air. "Claire." Eli's blood turned to ice. "No," he breathed. Mark's grin widened even as Eli scrambled to his feet. "Oh, looks like the real fun's back at the cabin," Mark taunted, his voice hoarse but gleeful. "Better hurry, hero." Eli didn't wait to respond. He sprinted to the truck, heart pounding, leaving Mark sprawled on the gravel, laughing like a man possessed. As the engine roared to life and the tires screamed against the road, only one thought burned in Eli's mind. "Hold on, Claire. I'm coming." The tires of Eli's truck tore at the gravel road, spitting stones in his frantic wake. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white, and his breath came in harsh, ragged gasps. The scream he'd heard still echoed in his ears, a sound so raw and terrified that it ripped through every barrier he'd built to protect himself over the years. "Claire. God, please let me be on time." The forest blurred past, a dizzying tunnel of dark trees and moonlight. His chest burned as his mind replayed every possible outcome, each more horrifying than the last. He could almost see Mark's face, that twisted smile, those cold, taunting eyes. Mark had always known exactly how to strike where it hurt most. Eli had left him behind on the road, but deep down, he knew Mark wasn't finished, not until he'd destroyed everything Eli held dear. As the cabin came into view, Eli slammed on the brakes so hard the truck fishtailed. He leapt out before it even stopped moving, his boots crunching against the gravel as he sprinted up the porch steps 2 at a time. The front door was ajar, swaying gently in the wind like an open mouth ready to swallow him whole. "Claire." Eli's voice cracked as he burst inside. The cabin was eerily quiet. Too quiet. The fire in the hearth had burned low, casting long, skeletal shadows on the walls. The iron poker lay discarded on the floor, a dark smear of blood glistening near its tip. His heart plummeted. No. No, no, no. From somewhere deeper inside, a muffled sob broke the silence. "Eli." The sound was faint, desperate, and it drove him forward like a lightning strike. He rounded the corner into the bedroom and froze. Mark stood behind Claire, one arm locked tightly around her waist, the other pressing a knife to her throat. Claire's face was pale and streaked with tears, her chest heaving with silent sobs. At the sight of Eli, something inside her seemed to shatter. "Don't, Eli," she gasped. "Please don't come closer." Mark's smile was pure malice. "Well, well," he drawled, dragging the blade slowly along Claire's skin just enough to make her flinch. "Look who finally decided to show up. Took you long enough." Eli's whole body went taut, his hands trembling with barely contained fury. "Let her go, Mark," he said, his voice low, deadly calm. "Or what?" Mark's tone was mocking, playful, like a cat toying with a trapped mouse. "You'll kill me? We both know you don't have it in you. Try me," Eli snapped. His voice cracked under the weight of his rage and fear. Mark's grin widened, sharp and cruel. "You don't get it, Eli. This isn't about Claire. It's never been about her. This is about you. About proving you're no better than me. You're sick," Eli spat. "You've always been sick. Oh, spare me the righteous act." Mark barked a bitter laugh, the sound echoing off the cabin walls. "You've spent your whole life pretending you're some noble protector, but deep down, you're just like me. You want her. You always have." Claire let out a strangled sob. "Stop it. Both of you, please." Mark tightened his grip, silencing her with a cruel twist of his arm. "See," he hissed in Eli's ear, his voice venomous. "She's terrified, and you like it. Admit it. Admit you've thought about taking what isn't yours." Eli's vision blurred with rage. "I'm nothing like you," he growled. "Prove it," Mark sneered, pressing the blade harder against Claire's throat until a thin line of crimson appeared. Claire whimpered, squeezing her eyes shut. "Come on, cousin. Show me who you really are. Save her, or watch her bleed." The room tilted, spinning around Eli as years of pain, guilt, and love crashed together inside him. All at once, he saw every moment that had led them here, the nights he'd held Claire while she cried, the stolen glances that burned hotter than they should have, the forbidden kiss they'd shared under a broken sky. He'd promised himself he would never hurt her, never cross that line, never become the monster Mark believed he was. And now, in this single brutal moment, he realized there was only one way to keep that promise. Eli's hand inched slowly toward the small revolver tucked at the back of his waistband. His movements were agonizingly deliberate, every muscle screaming for control. "Let her go," he said, each word like a hammer striking steel. Mark's laughter turned wild, unhinged. "Do it. Pull the trigger. Show her the darkness you've been hiding." Claire's tear-filled eyes locked on Eli's, silently begging him for strength. "Eli," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Please." The sound of her voice was the breaking point. In one fluid motion, Eli drew the revolver and fired. The gunshot was deafening in the small cabin. Mark's expression froze in shock, his mouth opening in a silent gasp as the knife slipped from his fingers and clattered to the floor. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Mark crumpled, his body hitting the ground with a sickening thud. Eli dropped the gun and lunged for Claire, gathering her into his arms as she sobbed against his chest. He pressed frantic kisses to her hair, her temples, her trembling hands. "It's over," he choked out. "It's over, Claire. You're safe now." But even as he said the words, he knew they weren't true. Mark's body lay sprawled on the floor, lifeless, but the damage he'd done, the darkness he'd unleashed, could never truly be erased. Claire clung to Eli as if he were the only thing tethering her to this world. Her voice was barely audible through her sobs. What have we done? Eli's throat tightened. He wanted to tell her they'd done what they had to do, that they'd been left with no choice. But the truth lodged in his chest like a jagged stone. Instead, he simply held her tighter, his own tears finally breaking free. As the first light of dawn crept through the cabin windows, painting everything in pale, unforgiving gray, Eli knew their lives would never be the same. Mark was gone, but the nightmare was only just beginning. The first pale rays of dawn filtered through the tattered curtains, casting a cold, merciless light across the cabin. Dust motes floated in the air like tiny ghosts, silent witnesses to what had just unfolded. The room smelled of smoke, sweat, and iron, the unmistakable metallic tang of blood. Claire sat huddled on the worn rug, her knees pulled to her chest, rocking slightly as if motion alone could keep her from unraveling completely. Her skin was clammy and pale, her nightgown torn at the shoulder where Mark's grip had been too rough. Eli knelt beside her, his arms wrapped tightly around her trembling frame. He could feel her heartbeat racing against his chest, wild and uneven, like a bird desperately trying to escape its cage. His shirt was damp with her tears, and his own eyes burned from the ones he refused to shed. On the floor a few feet away, Mark's body lay unnervingly still, one arm flung out at an unnatural angle. His eyes were open, glassy, and vacant, staring up at the ceiling as if still mocking them even in death. Eli couldn't bring himself to look directly at him. Every time his gaze drifted that way, it felt like he was staring at the darkest part of himself, the part he'd spent years denying. Claire's whisper broke the heavy silence. Is he really gone? Her voice was so small, so fragile, Eli almost didn't recognize it. He swallowed hard before answering, his throat raw. Yes, he said, though the word felt like ash on his tongue. It's over. But even as the words left his lips, he knew they weren't true. Claire turned her tear-streaked face toward him, her eyes wide and haunted. What happens now, Eli? He had no answer. None that wouldn't shatter her completely. The world outside was waking up. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called, the sound jarringly normal. Soon the sun would rise fully, and with it would come questions. Explanations. Consequences. Eli squeezed his eyes shut, pressing his forehead against Claire's hair. We'll figure it out, he murmured, though doubt gnawed at him. I promise. I won't let anyone hurt you again. Claire's fingers clutched at his shirt like a lifeline. But you can't promise that, Eli, she sobbed. You can't protect me from this. From what we've done. Her words sliced through him, sharp and true. The memory of the gunshot replayed in his mind, slow and relentless. The way Mark's body had jerked. The shock on his face. The awful finality of the moment. He had killed his own cousin. And yet, deep down, a dark, guilty part of Eli felt relief. Mark had been a shadow over their lives for so long, poisoning everything he touched. Now that shadow was gone, and for the first time, there was space to breathe. But at what cost? Claire shifted slightly, lifting her head to meet his gaze. Her lower lip trembled. They'll say it was murder, she whispered. They won't understand that he was going to, her voice broke. That he would have killed me. Eli cupped her face gently, forcing her to look at him. We'll make them understand, he said fiercely. I'll tell them everything. That I did it to protect you. That you had nothing to do with it. Claire shook her head violently, panic flaring in her eyes. No, Eli. If you tell them, they'll take you away from me. I can't lose you. Not now. Not after. Her words dissolved into a choked sob. Eli pulled her into his arms again, his heart twisting painfully. You won't lose me, he vowed, even though he had no idea how to keep that promise. We'll find a way through this. Together. They stayed like that for what felt like hours, clinging to each other as the world outside grew brighter and louder. Eventually, Claire's sobs quieted to soft, hiccuping breaths. She was exhausted, her body trembling from the aftermath of fear and adrenaline. Eli stood slowly, reluctant to let her go even for a moment. Stay here, he said gently. I need to take care of Mark. The words felt strange, hollow. Take care of Mark. How could he make it sound so simple when it was anything but? Claire's hand shot out, gripping his wrist. What are you going to do? Eli hesitated. The truth that he didn't know felt too dangerous to admit. I'll make sure no one finds him here, he said finally. No one can ever know what happened tonight. Claire's lips parted in protest, but no sound came out. Her eyes shimmered with fresh tears as she nodded reluctantly, releasing his wrist. Eli crouched beside Mark's body. His stomach churned violently, bile rising in his throat as he reached out to close his cousin's lifeless eyes. I never wanted this, he whispered, his voice breaking. God help me, Mark, I never wanted this. Mark's face, even in death, seemed to hold a faint, mocking smirk. Eli forced himself to look away. He dragged Mark's body outside under the pale light of dawn, his muscles screaming with effort and his heart screaming with grief. Each step felt like he was sinking deeper into a pit he might never climb out of. Behind him, Claire stood in the doorway, arms wrapped tightly around herself, watching with hollow eyes. When Eli returned to her side, his face was pale and drawn, his hands shaking. It's done, he said flatly. Claire reached for him, her touch hesitant. Where did you take him? Somewhere no one will find him, Eli answered, his tone clipped. He couldn't bear to give her details. She nodded, though she didn't truly understand. For a long moment, they just stood there, staring at each other. And in that silence, the weight of dawn settled over them. Heavy, suffocating, inescapable. The nightmare wasn't over. It had only changed shape. And Eli knew, with a sick certainty, that the hardest part was still to come. The sun climbed higher, washing the cabin in harsh, unforgiving light. The soft, concealing shadows of night were gone now, leaving everything exposed. The torn curtains, the overturned chair, the dark stains seeping into the wooden floorboards where Mark had fallen. Eli stood by the window, his jaw clenched so tightly it ached. Outside, the world looked deceptively normal. Birds chirped, a squirrel darted across the yard, the forest swayed gently in the breeze. But inside, everything was wrong. Behind him, Claire sat silently on the edge of the bed, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were bone-white. She hadn't spoken since Eli returned from hiding Mark's body. She hadn't even looked at him. It was as if she were drifting somewhere far away, lost in a nightmare only she could see. Eli turned, watching her with aching tenderness. He wanted to go to her, to pull her into his arms and promise her it would all be okay. But promises felt like lies now. Everything feels like a lie now. Finally, Claire's hoarse whisper broke the oppressive silence. What are we going to tell people? Eli's heart thudded painfully. He'd been dreading that question, but he knew it had to be faced. We tell them, he said carefully, that Mark came by last night. That he was angry. We had an argument, and he left. Claire's head snapped up, her eyes wide with disbelief. That's it? You think they'll just believe he left and never came back? Eli crouched in front of her, taking her cold hands in his. Claire, listen to me. If we tell the truth, if anyone finds out what really happened, they'll see it as murder. They won't understand that I was protecting you. Her lower lip trembled. But lying. Eli, I've never lied like this before. It feels, she broke off, pressing a hand to her mouth as tears welled up again. I know, Eli said softly, his voice rough. It feels wrong. It is wrong. But it's the only way to keep us safe. She shook her head, a sob breaking free. Safe? Nothing about this will ever feel safe again. Eli gathered her into his arms, holding her tightly as if he could shield her from the world itself. I'll carry the lie, he vowed. I'll bear the weight so you don't have to. All you have to do is stay quiet. Let me protect you. For a moment, she clung to him, her face buried against his chest. But when she finally pulled back, there was a haunted distance in her eyes that scared him more than anything. What if someone saw something? She whispered. What if they ask questions we can't answer? Eli forced himself to sound calm, even though his own pulse was hammering wildly. Then we stick to the story. No matter what. The first test came sooner than either of them expected. By mid-morning, a dusty old pickup truck rumbled up the road. Eli's gut clenched when he saw the familiar shape of Sheriff Dale climbing out. The sheriff was a tall, broad-shouldered man with graying hair and sharp, watchful eyes. He'd known Eli since they were kids. "Morning, Lai," Dale said as he approached, his gaze sweeping over the cabin. "Everything all right out here?" Eli forced a casual smile that felt brittle on his face. "Yeah, Sheriff. Just, keeping to ourselves." Dale's eyes narrowed slightly. "I heard some commotion last night. Folks in town said there were raised voices coming from this direction." Eli's stomach dropped. Raised voices. God, how much did they hear? He shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant. Mark came by. He was upset about some old family stuff. We argued a bit, but he left before things got too heated. The lie slid out smoother than he'd expected, which somehow made it feel even worse. "Mark, huh?" Dale scratched his chin. "Haven't seen him around lately. You know where he went after he left here?" Eli shook his head quickly. "No idea. Probably back to the city. You know Mark, he never stays in one place long." The sheriff studied him for a long, heavy moment. Eli forced himself to meet that sharp gaze, his heart pounding so hard he was sure it must be visible beneath his shirt. Finally, Dale grunted. "All right. Just checking in. You tell me if you hear anything from him, you hear?" "Of course," Eli said, relief flooding through him so quickly he almost swayed. As the sheriff turned to leave, Claire appeared in the doorway. Her face was pale, her hair tangled, but she managed a weak smile. "Morning, Sheriff," she murmured. Dale tipped his hat. "Morning, Claire. You doing okay?" Claire's hands twisted nervously in the fabric of her dress. "Just tired. Didn't sleep much last night." Something flickered in Dale's eyes. Concern, suspicion. Eli couldn't tell. But he simply nodded and climbed back into his truck. The rumble of the engine faded into the distance, leaving a tense silence behind. Claire sagged against the doorframe, her breath shuddering. "I thought he knew. I thought he could see it on me." Eli crossed the room in 2 strides, pulling her close. "He doesn't know," he said fiercely. "No one does. As long as we stick to the story, no one ever will." But deep down, a sickening doubt gnawed at him. The way Dale had looked at them, the way his questions lingered, it felt like the first thread of a web slowly, inexorably tightening around them. And Eli knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning of the lies they'd have to tell. The rest of the day passed in a haze of dread. Claire moved through the cabin like a ghost, her steps slow and uncertain, her hands trembling whenever she tried to hold something as simple as a glass of water. Eli stayed close, watching her, guarding her, though his own insides felt like they were unraveling thread by thread. By late afternoon, a storm rolled in from the mountains, dark clouds swallowing the sun. The first heavy drops of rain struck the windows just as the power flickered and went out. The sudden darkness made Claire flinch violently, and she let out a strangled gasp. "It's okay," Eli said quickly, lighting a lantern. The warm glow filled the room, but it did little to push back the oppressive weight pressing in from the storm outside. "Just a little power outage. It happens out here." Claire nodded, hugging herself. "It just startled me." Eli studied her face, the shadows under her eyes, the pale curve of her mouth. She hadn't eaten much since the night before, barely spoken except in whispers. He couldn't stand seeing her like this. So fragile, so unlike the fierce, laughing girl who used to tease him endlessly when they were younger. "Claire," he said gently, sitting beside her on the couch. "Talk to me. You've been quiet all day. Tell me what's going on in your head." She hesitated, biting her lip, then finally met his gaze. "I keep hearing his voice," she whispered. "Mark. It's like he's still here, yelling at me. Every time the wind bangs against the house, I think it's him coming back." Eli's chest ached at her words. He reached out, cupping her face in his hands. "He's gone, Claire. He can't hurt you anymore. I swear on my life, no one will ever lay a hand on you again." Her eyes filled with tears, shimmering in the lantern light. "You can't promise that, Eli." "Not really. The world doesn't work like that." "Maybe not for other people," he said fiercely. "But for you, I'll make it work. Even if it kills me." The storm outside roared louder, wind howling through the trees. Claire shivered, leaning into him as if his warmth was the only thing holding her together. They sat like that for a long time, the world shrinking to the rhythm of their breathing. Later that evening, there was a knock at the door. The sound was soft, almost lost beneath the storm, but to Eli it was like a gunshot. He froze, every muscle in his body going rigid. Claire's head snapped up, her eyes wide with fear. Who would come out here in weather like this?" she whispered. Eli didn't answer. He grabbed the lantern and crept to the door, peering through the peephole. His heart sank when he saw Sheriff Dale standing on the porch, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. He opened the door, forcing a strained smile. "Sheriff, what brings you back?" Dale stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, shaking off the rain. "Sorry to drop by unannounced, Eli. Storm like this, I like to check on folks, make sure everyone's safe." Claire stood behind Eli, her hands hidden in the folds of her dress. "That's kind of you, Sheriff," she said softly. Dale's sharp eyes swept the room, lingering on the overturned chair that Eli hadn't noticed earlier. His brow furrowed. "Everything all right here?" Eli's pulse thundered in his ears. "Yeah. Storm knocked out the power, that's all. We were just trying to get settled." The sheriff grunted, clearly unconvinced. He turned to Claire, his gaze softening slightly. "How about you, Claire? You holding up okay?" Claire's lips parted, but no sound came out. For a terrifying moment, Eli thought she might break, might spill everything in a rush of panic. But then she swallowed hard and nodded. "I'm fine, Sheriff. Just a little on edge, I guess. Storms make me nervous." Dale studied her for another long moment, then nodded slowly. "Understandable. These woods can feel mighty lonely in weather like this." He walked toward the window, peering out into the darkness. "You know, Mark hasn't been seen in town for a while. Folks are starting to wonder where he's gotten off to." Eli's stomach clenched. "Like I said earlier, he probably went back to the city." "Maybe." The sheriff's tone was casual, but his eyes were sharp when he turned back to Eli. "Funny thing, though. Someone mentioned seeing his truck parked near the old quarry yesterday. Know anything about that?" Eli's mind raced. The quarry. He hadn't been anywhere near it, but Mark's truck, he'd left it hidden off a back road after. "God, think, Eli. Think." "No," he said finally, keeping his voice steady. "Haven't been out that way in weeks." Dale nodded, though the crease between his brows deepened. "Well, if you hear anything, you'll let me know, right?" "Of course." When the sheriff finally left, Claire sagged against the wall, trembling. "He knows," she whispered. "Eli, I saw it in his eyes. He knows." Eli wrapped his arms around her, holding her tight. "No, he suspects. There's a difference. As long as we stay calm, as long as we don't slip up, he can't prove anything." But even as he said the words, a cold certainty settled in his gut. Sheriff Dale wasn't going to let this go. The storm outside might pass by morning, but inside their cabin, a different storm was only just beginning. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving the forest cloaked in a mist so thick it seemed to swallow sound. The air smelled of wet earth and pine needles. Claire stood by the window, her fingers lightly touching the glass, watching droplets slide down in winding trails. She hadn't slept. Neither had Eli. Behind her, Eli was at the kitchen table, his head bowed over a cup of cold coffee. The weight of the previous night pressed on him like a physical thing. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the look on Sheriff Dale's face, sharp and knowing. He couldn't shake the feeling that the sheriff had walked away with more than just suspicions. Claire's voice was barely above a whisper. "Eli, what if he comes back today? What if he brings someone with him?" Eli rubbed his face, trying to scrub away the exhaustion. "Then we'll deal with it. Claire, listen to me. We just have to keep our story straight. You were here with me all night. That's it. That's all anyone needs to know." She turned toward him, her eyes red-rimmed and haunted. "But what about Mark's truck? If they find it?" "They won't." His tone was sharp, but not at her. It was his own rising panic he was fighting to keep under control. "I'll take care of it before anyone else gets close. You just have to trust me." Claire wrapped her arms around herself, rocking slightly. "I do trust you, Eli. It's the only thing keeping me from falling apart." They spent the day in a tense, watchful silence, the fog outside never lifting. Eli paced restlessly, checking and rechecking the windows, while Claire sat curled up on the couch, staring into the distance as though she could see something no one else could. Every creak of the old cabin made them flinch. Every distant sound of a car engine made their hearts leap. By late afternoon, Eli couldn't take it anymore. "I have to move the truck tonight," he said. "If they find it near the quarry, everything unravels. I'll drive it deeper into the forest and leave it where no one will ever look." Claire's breath caught. "Eli, no. What if someone sees you? What if you get stopped?" "I won't," he said firmly, though a thread of fear wound through his voice. "The storm knocked out half the back roads last night. Nobody's out there but me." She stood and grabbed his arm, her fingers digging into his skin. "Please don't leave me alone here. Not tonight." Eli's resolve wavered at the sight of her trembling. "Claire, I'll be back before midnight. I promise. This is the only way to keep you safe." Her lips trembled, but she nodded. "Just come back to me. Please." He kissed her forehead, lingering for a moment longer than he should have. Always. Night fell, and with it came a new kind of darkness, thick and suffocating. Eli drove Mark's truck along a narrow dirt road, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Every bump jolted through his body like a warning. The forest loomed on either side, endless and silent. When he reached the clearing he'd chosen, he killed the engine and sat there, breathing hard. The plan was simple: push the truck into the ravine, make it disappear forever. But as he stepped out into the cold night air, a beam of light suddenly cut through the trees. Eli froze. Headlights. Someone else was out here. He dove behind the truck just as a vehicle rolled slowly into the clearing. Through the branches, he saw the unmistakable silhouette of Sheriff Dale's cruiser. Back at the cabin, Claire sat in the dim glow of a single lantern, wringing her hands. Every minute stretched into an eternity. The old clock on the mantel ticked too loudly, each second like a hammer strike in her chest. A sudden noise outside made her jump to her feet. She rushed to the window, but saw only the thick blackness of the forest. "Eli," she whispered, though she knew he couldn't hear her. When the knock came, it was soft, almost polite. Her heart stopped. Slowly, she opened the door. Sheriff Dale stood there, rain dripping from the brim of his hat, just as he had the night before. But this time, there was no pretense of casual concern in his eyes. His gaze was sharp, assessing, and cold. "Evening, Claire," he said, tipping his hat slightly. "Mind if I come in?" Claire's throat went dry. "Eli's not here," she blurted, then instantly regretted it. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "Oh? And where might he be on a night like this?" Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Panic surged like icy water through her veins. She was caught, cornered. Dale stepped past her, uninvited. "You seem nervous, Claire. Care to tell me why?" Meanwhile, Eli crouched low behind the truck, his mind racing. Sheriff Dale was here. That meant two things: he'd been followed, and the sheriff already suspected far more than he'd let on. Eli's options narrowed to a single, terrifying truth. He couldn't just hide anymore. If Dale found the truck, it was over. For him. For Claire. For everything. He had to act. Somewhere deep in the mist-shrouded woods, a lone wolf howled, its cry long and mournful. Eli took it as a warning, or a promise. Either way, there was no turning back now. Claire's pulse thudded in her ears as Sheriff Dale stepped fully into the cabin, shaking rain from his coat. The smell of damp wool and smoke filled the small space, mixing with the sharp tang of Claire's fear. She clasped her hands tightly in front of her to hide their trembling. "Sheriff, I wasn't expecting you tonight," she managed to say, her voice thin and unsteady. Dale gave a slow, almost indulgent smile. "Storm knocked down a few trees up by Miller's Ridge. Figured I'd check on folks out this way. It's a lonely stretch of road out here." His eyes roamed over the cabin, sharp and searching, especially for a woman all alone. Claire swallowed hard, her throat dry. "Eli, he just stepped out for some firewood," she lied quickly, her mind scrambling for excuses. "He'll be back any minute." Dale's eyebrows lifted, as if amused by the effort. "Is that so?" He walked past her, trailing his fingers along the edge of the worn wooden table. "Funny thing, though. I saw some tire tracks leading up the old quarry road. Fresh ones. Strange place for firewood, don't you think?" Her heart nearly stopped. She forced herself to meet his gaze, willing her voice not to shake. Maybe someone else drove through earlier. Hunters, maybe. Could be, Dale said casually, though his eyes never softened. But it's odd. Those tracks looked an awful lot like Eli's truck. He tilted his head. Tell me, Claire, do you know anything about that? Out in the clearing, Eli crouched behind Mark's truck, his breath coming in ragged bursts. Sheriff Dale's cruiser idled only a few feet away, headlights slicing through the mist. Eli's muscles ached from staying so still, every instinct screaming at him to run. But running would only confirm Dale's suspicions. He crept around the back of the truck, keeping low. If he could just push it into the ravine before Dale spotted him, there might still be a chance. But then Dale's voice floated through the trees, sharp and commanding. Eli, I know you're out there. Eli froze, his hands pressed against cold metal. Come on now, Dale called. Step into the light. Let's have a little talk. Eli's heart pounded. He thought of Claire, standing alone in the cabin with no way to defend herself. If Dale had been to the cabin already, Claire was vulnerable. And Mark's shadow still loomed over all of this, even in death. If Dale found the truck, there'd be no hiding what had happened. Eli's entire world would unravel. He closed his eyes for a brief, agonizing second. Then he made his choice. Back at the cabin, Claire tried desperately to keep her composure. Sheriff, you're mistaken, she said, her voice trembling. Eli's a good man. He wouldn't. Dale cut her off, his tone sharp. Good men don't vanish into the woods on nights like this. And good men don't keep secrets that big. He stepped closer, his towering frame casting a long shadow across the cabin floor. You think I don't see what's going on here, Claire? I'm not blind. Claire backed up until her spine hit the cold stone hearth. I don't know what you mean. Oh, you know exactly what I mean. Dale's eyes gleamed. I've seen the way you two look at each other. That kind of thing doesn't stay hidden forever. Claire's breath caught, shame and terror colliding in her chest. You don't understand. Then make me understand, Dale said softly, almost coaxing. Because right now, it looks a whole lot like you and Eli are tangled up in something you shouldn't be, and Mark's disappearance is just the tip of the iceberg. Eli stepped into the clearing, hands raised. Dale, it's me, he called out, his voice steady despite the storm of fear inside him. Let's talk. The sheriff swung his flashlight toward Eli, the beam cutting through the fog like a blade. Well, look who finally decided to show himself, Dale said, his tone laced with suspicion. Care to explain why you're out here at this hour? Eli's mind raced. I came out to check the road. Thought maybe some branches fell during the storm. Didn't want Claire driving into town and getting stuck. Branches, huh? Dale gestured toward the truck half hidden in the shadows. And what about that? Eli's stomach churned. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. Dale took a step closer, hand resting casually near his holstered gun. Thing is, Eli, I've been around long enough to know when a man's lying. So why don't you save us both some trouble and tell me what really happened? Back at the cabin, Claire's fear reached a breaking point. She could hear her own heartbeat, fast and frantic, like a drum in her ears. If Eli didn't come back soon, she knew Dale would tear the truth out of her, piece by piece. She whispered to herself over and over, like a prayer. Please come back, Eli. Please. Out in the clearing, Eli's chest heaved as he made a split-second decision. Fine, he said, his voice low but firm. You want the truth? Here it is. Dale's flashlight beam steadied on Eli's face, his expression unreadable. But before Eli could speak another word, a loud crack echoed through the trees, a branch snapping underfoot. Both men turned sharply toward the sound. And from the darkness, another figure emerged. Someone Eli never expected to see again. Claire's whispered prayers in the cabin went unanswered, because the nightmare they'd been running from was about to walk straight out of the mist. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Eli's breath caught in his throat as the figure stepped out of the fog, one slow, deliberate footfall at a time. The mist curled around him like pale fingers, revealing a face Eli thought he'd never see again. Mark. Alive. Eli stumbled backward, his mind refusing to make sense of what his eyes were seeing. No, he rasped, his voice breaking. You're dead. Mark's lips curled into a cold, humorless smile. You always did underestimate me, Eli. Sheriff Dale's eyes darted between the two men, confusion hardening into suspicion. Would one of you care to explain what the hell is going on here? Eli's entire body trembled, every muscle tight with shock. He'd been so certain, so sure, that the night at the quarry had ended Mark's reign of terror for good. He had seen the lifeless stillness, had felt the finality of it. But Mark was here, standing tall, very much alive, and more dangerous than ever. How? Eli choked out. I buried you. You tried, Mark interrupted, his tone smooth and mocking. But you've always been sloppy, Eli. Always too soft to finish what you start. His gaze slid to Sheriff Dale, calculating. And lucky for me, some people can't resist a good story. Back at the cabin, Claire sat rigidly in the armchair, her hands clenched so tightly they'd gone numb. The silence was unbearable. She strained to hear any sign of Eli outside. Footsteps, voices, anything. But all she could hear was the relentless ticking of the old clock and the echo of her own ragged breathing. Then, faintly, through the walls and the fog, came a single, distant shout. Her heart seized. Eli. She didn't even think. She grabbed her coat, shoved her feet into her boots, and bolted into the night, her lantern swinging wildly in her trembling hand. The cold bit into her skin as she stumbled down the path, driven by a fear so sharp it cut through every rational thought. In the clearing, the tension thickened, each man locked in a deadly triangle of mistrust. Sheriff Dale kept one hand near his weapon, his eyes narrowing. Somebody better start talking, Dale said, his voice like gravel. Because right now, I've got two stories and neither one makes a damn bit of sense. Mark laughed, a low, sinister sound that made Eli's blood run cold. Oh, there's only one story, Sheriff. And it's simpler than you think. He took a step closer, his presence commanding, almost hypnotic. Eli killed me. Or at least, he tried to. Because he couldn't stand the idea of me coming back here and telling everyone about his little indiscretion. Eli's stomach dropped. That's a lie. Dale's gaze snapped to Eli, sharp and questioning. Is it? Mark's smile widened, cruel and knowing. Ask him where he was the night I vanished. Ask him why he's been sneaking around like a man with blood on his hands. Eli's hands shook. He felt cornered, trapped between the truth and the lies, between the woman he loved and the past he couldn't outrun. I was protecting Claire, he shouted, his voice raw. Everything I did to keep her safe. The sheriff's eyes narrowed further. From what? Before Eli could answer, Mark turned his gaze directly toward Dale, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. From me. The word hung in the mist like a curse. In an instant, everything shifted. Dale's stance tightened, his suspicion giving way to alertness. Eli's heart hammered so violently he thought it might burst. Mark took another step, his voice dripping venom. You see, Sheriff, Eli and Claire have a secret. A dirty little secret they've been hiding for years. And when I found out about it, well, Eli here decided the simplest solution was to make me disappear. That's not true. Eli's voice broke with desperation. Claire had nothing to do with this. Mark's head snapped toward him, eyes gleaming like a predator's. Don't you dare speak for her. Through the fog, Claire stumbled into the edge of the clearing. She froze, her breath catching as the scene unfolded before her. Eli standing wild-eyed and pale, Sheriff Dale poised like a coiled spring, and Mark, alive, whole, smirking like the devil himself. For a moment, she thought she might faint. Claire, Eli gasped when he saw her. Go back. You shouldn't be here. But she couldn't move. Her body wouldn't obey. No, she whispered, her voice barely carrying. It can't be. Mark's smile deepened, wicked and triumphant. Oh, it can, he said smoothly. Hello, darling. Claire's knees buckled. The night she thought she'd buried forever had clawed its way back from the grave. And now there would be no hiding. No escape. The nightmare had truly begun. Claire's vision blurred as tears welled in her eyes. The lantern in her trembling hand swung wildly, casting erratic shadows across the clearing. She stared at Mark, disbelief and terror twisting inside her chest. No, she whispered, her voice barely audible. You're supposed to be dead. Mark finished for her, his smirk stretching into something almost feral. Oh, sweetheart, death and I have always had an understanding. He tilted his head, his eyes gleaming in the lantern light. Did you really think Eli had the guts to finish me? Eli stepped forward, his entire body tense like a drawn bow. Stop it, Mark. This ends tonight. Mark's laughter was low and cold, echoing through the fog. Oh, I agree, brother. It does end tonight. The only question is, who walks away when it's over? Sheriff Dale cut in sharply, his patience fraying. Both of you, shut your mouths before I haul you in right now. Somebody start talking straight, or I swear I'll put you both in cuffs. Mark held up his hands in mock surrender, his voice silky smooth. Fine. You want the truth, Sheriff? Here it is. He pointed a finger at Eli, his face twisting into pure malice. Eli tried to kill me because he couldn't stand what I knew about him and about her. Claire flinched as Mark's words sliced through the clearing like a blade. Her knees nearly gave out, and she stumbled backward, catching herself on a tree trunk. Mark, don't, Eli warned, his voice breaking. Leave her out of this. Mark's eyes glittered with dark satisfaction. Oh no, little brother, she is this. Everything that's happened started with her. Sheriff Dale's brow furrowed, his hand shifting closer to his holstered weapon. What are you talking about? Mark turned slowly, savoring the moment. His voice dropped to a sinister whisper. They've been lying to you, Sheriff. 4 years. Playing house out here in the woods while pretending they're just, what? Roommates? Friends? Claire's breath caught, a sharp gasp tearing from her throat. Stop it, she cried, her voice raw. Please don't do this. But Mark didn't stop. He stepped closer to Dale, never taking his eyes off Eli and Claire. She's not just some girl Eli took pity on, Mark sneered. She's his niece. The words hit the clearing like a thunderclap. Sheriff Dale's eyes widened, his entire body going rigid. What did you just say? Mark's smile was pure poison. You heard me. Claire's world spun. The ground seemed to tilt beneath her feet, the air sucked from her lungs. No, she choked out. No, that's not. Don't lie now, Claire, Mark said, his tone almost pitying, though his eyes were cruel. Tell the good sheriff how Uncle Eli took you in after your parents died. How he raised you like his own. And then tell him when exactly things crossed the line. Sheriff Dale turned toward Eli, his face pale and unreadable. Is this true? Eli's voice cracked. Yes, he whispered. But it's not what you think. Oh, it's exactly what I think. Mark spat, his rage boiling over. You should have seen the way he looked at her when we were kids. I always knew he was weak, but I never thought he'd stoop this low. Shut up, Eli roared, lunging toward him. But Dale was quicker, stepping between them with his hand firmly on his gun. Enough, he barked. Nobody moves unless you want a bullet in the dirt. Eli froze, his chest heaving, tears burning in his eyes. Sheriff, please, he begged. You don't understand. I love her. I have always loved her. But I never meant for any of this to happen. Mark let out a mocking laugh. Never meant for it to happen? You two have been sneaking around for months. I caught you once, remember? The night at the quarry. Claire's sob broke the tense air, raw and anguished. That night, she stammered. That night wasn't what you think. Mark, you followed us, you threatened us. Mark's smirk turned into a snarl. You're damn right I did. Because someone had to stop you before this got any uglier. Sheriff Dale's voice was deadly calm, but his eyes burned. So what happened, Eli? Did you really try to kill him? Eli's knees buckled under the weight of it all. He sank to the ground, his voice hoarse. Yes, he admitted, his confession tearing free like a wound reopening. But I didn't have a choice. He came at Claire, Sheriff. He tried to hurt her. I snapped. I thought I was protecting her. Claire dropped beside him, clutching his face in her hands. No, Eli. You didn't just think, you did. You saved me. The clearing fell silent except for their ragged breathing. Mark's laughter shattered it like glass. Oh, this is rich, he sneered. The tragic lovers, united against the cruel villain. Tell me, Claire, when you whisper his name in the dark, do you call him Uncle Eli or just Eli? Shut your mouth. Eli roared, lunging again, his grief and fury boiling over. Sheriff Dale fired a warning shot into the air. The gunshot cracked through the night, echoing off the trees. Enough, he shouted. Nobody moves or the next one won't be in the air. Everyone froze, breaths coming fast and shallow. Then Claire spoke, her voice soft but steady, cutting through the tension like a fragile blade. I love him, she said. The clearing went utterly still. I love Eli, she repeated, tears streaming down her face. And I don't care what anyone thinks. He saved me, Sheriff. From Mark. From my own grief. From a life that was nothing but pain. Eli stared at her, his heart breaking and swelling all at once. Claire. Sheriff Dale's face hardened, his expression unreadable. This just got a whole lot more complicated, he muttered. And as the fog swirled around them, the truth hung heavy in the air, undeniable, irreversible, and ready to destroy them all. The world felt like it had tilted on its axis. Claire's confession still echoed through the clearing, hanging in the fog like a ghost that wouldn't fade. Eli stared at her, his chest rising and falling with each ragged breath. The words he had longed to hear, the truth she had spoken so boldly, were both salvation and ruin. Mark's face twisted into something dark and feral. Well, there it is, he spat. The pretty little secret, laid bare for everyone to see. Congratulations, Claire, you've just destroyed whatever scrap of dignity you had left. Shut up, Mark. Claire snapped, surprising even herself with the strength in her voice. Her entire body trembled, but she stood her ground. You don't get to talk about dignity. Not after what you've done. Mark let out a cruel laugh. What I've done? You're standing here defending him, your uncle, after admitting you've been lying with him like some twisted. That's enough. Eli roared, his voice raw and dangerous. His fists clenched, knuckles white, as he took a step forward. One more word out of you and… or what? Mark cut in, grinning like a predator. You'll finish what you started the night at the quarry? Go ahead, little brother. Show Claire exactly what kind of man you really are. Sheriff Dale's voice cut through the rising chaos. Everybody stay where you are, he barked, his gun raised, finger trembling slightly on the trigger. Mark, back away. Eli, don't take another step. Claire, get behind me now. But Claire didn't move. No, she said firmly, shaking her head. I'm not hiding anymore. Not from him. Not from anyone. She looked at Mark, her voice steady even as tears streamed down her face. You think you can twist this into something ugly, but you don't know the first thing about love. Eli didn't take advantage of me. He saved me. Mark's expression flickered for the briefest moment. Anger, disbelief, something almost like hurt, but it was gone before anyone could name it. You're blind, he hissed. You don't see what he really is. Eli stepped closer, his voice breaking. Mark, please. You've hated me our whole lives, but this isn't about us anymore. Whatever you think you're protecting Claire from, you're wrong. Mark's laugh was bitter and hollow. Wrong? You're the one who's wrong, Eli. You've always been wrong. About Dad. About me. About everything. The sheriff glanced between them, sweat beading on his brow. Someone start making sense right now, he growled. Because if I don't get the whole story, I swear I'll haul all three of you in. Eli's breath hitched. You want the truth, Sheriff? Fine. I'll tell you everything. Don't you dare, Mark warned, his voice low and dangerous. But Eli went on, his words tumbling out like a flood he could no longer hold back. When our parents died, I was left to take care of Claire. She was just a kid, Sheriff, broken, terrified, alone. And I swore I'd protect her, no matter what it cost me. Claire's lip quivered as she listened, her heart aching. For years, that's all it was, Eli continued. I was her guardian, her safe place. But as she grew older, things changed. She changed. And one day, I realized that what I felt for her wasn't just protectiveness anymore. It was love. Sheriff Dale's face tightened, but he didn't interrupt. I fought it, Eli said, his voice raw. God, I fought it with everything I had. I told myself it was wrong, that I was wrong. But then there was that night, the night Mark found us. Claire reached for his hand, gripping it tightly. Eli, you don't have to. Yes, I do, he said firmly, his eyes locked on hers. They need to hear it. Mark's jaw clenched so hard it looked like it might shatter. That night at the quarry, Eli said, his voice trembling. Claire and I went there to talk, to finally face what we were feeling. It wasn't supposed to go as far as it did. But when Mark showed up, he didn't just confront us. He threatened her. Claire's eyes filled with tears at the memory. He grabbed me, Sheriff, she whispered. He said if I didn't leave Eli, he'd make me regret it. Sheriff Dale's expression darkened, his grip tightening on his gun. Is that true, Mark? Mark didn't answer right away. His silence was damning. That's when I lost control, Eli said, his voice breaking. I thought he was going to hurt her, so I snapped. I hit him. Hard. He went down, and for a moment, I thought I'd killed him. Mark's lip curled in a sneer. You should have finished the job. The weight of Eli's confession hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Claire wrapped her arms around him, sobbing into his chest. You saved me, she cried. That's all that matters. Sheriff Dale lowered his weapon slightly, his expression conflicted. This is a mess, he muttered. One hell of a mess. Mark stepped forward, his voice cold and sharp. You think this is over? It's not. Even if you get away with this tonight, you'll never outrun the truth. He turned his glare on Claire. And you'll spend the rest of your life wondering if he loves you, or if you were just the only person who ever looked at him like he mattered. Stop! Claire screamed, her voice raw and desperate. You don't know him. You don't know us. Mark's sneer softened into something almost sad. Oh, Claire, I know him better than you ever will. And with that, he stepped back into the fog, disappearing into the night, leaving his words and their broken hearts behind. The night seemed to collapse in on itself after Mark vanished into the fog. His last words echoed like a curse, sinking deep into Claire's chest, twisting around her ribs until she could barely breathe. Eli held her tightly, his arms wrapped around her trembling body, but even his warmth couldn't stop the icy fear seeping into her bones. She could feel his heart hammering against her ear, each beat frantic and uneven. Sheriff Dale lowered his gun completely now, though his stance stayed tense, ready for anything. All right, he said gruffly, his voice breaking the fragile silence. Someone explain to me how the hell this family managed to get so tangled up in whatever this is. Eli took a step back, though his hand never left Claire's. I told you the truth, Sheriff, he said hoarsely. Maybe not all the details, but enough for you to understand why things got out of control. The sheriff's gaze flicked to Claire. And you? Is that how you see it? Claire swallowed hard. Yes, she whispered. Eli didn't hurt me. He never would. He's the only person who's ever made me feel safe. Sheriff Dale sighed, rubbing his hand down his face. Safe isn't the word most folks would use, Claire. You too. This whole situation is a powder keg. One wrong move, and it'll blow up bigger than you can imagine. Eli's jaw tightened. I don't care what people think, he said, his voice rough. I've spent my whole life trying to do the right thing. Sacrificing, hiding, swallowing my feelings so no one would get hurt. And for what? To be painted as a monster by my own brother. Claire turned to him, her eyes shining with tears. You're not a monster, she said fiercely. You're the only good thing in my life, Eli. The only one who's ever truly seen me. Her words broke something in him. He cupped her face, pressing his forehead to hers, breathing her in like he needed her to survive. For a moment, it was just the two of them, the rest of the world falling away. But Sheriff Dale cleared his throat loudly, forcing them back to reality. Much as I hate to break up this moment, we've still got a serious problem. Mark's out there, angry as hell and probably armed. And now he's got every reason to come after you both. Eli pulled away reluctantly, his hand lingering on Claire's cheek. Then we'll leave, he said firmly. Tonight. Before he has a chance to do anything. Claire blinked, startled. Leave? Where would we even go? Anywhere, Eli said. As long as we're together. The sheriff frowned deeply. Running won't solve this, son. It'll just make you look guilty. Eli met his gaze, unflinching. I am guilty, he said, his voice low and steady. Guilty of loving someone I shouldn't. Guilty of failing to protect her sooner. If leaving means keeping Claire safe, then that's what I'll do. Claire's breath caught, her chest tightening with a painful mix of fear and longing. Eli, she whispered. Sheriff Dales stared at him for a long moment, then sighed heavily. Look, I've known you since you were a boy. You've made mistakes, sure, but I've never once believed you'd hurt anyone. Still, if you two run, I won't be able to help you when the law comes looking. Eli nodded. I understand. Claire turned to the sheriff, desperation in her eyes. Please, she begged. Just give us a little time. A head start, maybe. Enough to figure out what to do. The sheriff hesitated, then reluctantly gave a single nod. All right. But this stays between us. And if Mark shows up again, I can't guarantee what'll happen. As they walked back toward Eli's truck, Claire clung to his arm, her body still trembling. The fog was so thick now it felt like the night itself was trying to swallow them whole. Eli, she said softly, her voice breaking. What if Mark's right? What if what we have can't survive out there? He stopped walking, turning to face her under the dim glow of the truck's headlights. Claire, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I don't care if the whole damn world is against us. I don't care if we have to start over in some nameless town where nobody knows our story. As long as you're with me, that's all I need. She threw her arms around him, holding on like she was afraid he might disappear. I'm with you, she whispered fiercely. No matter what. As Eli helped her into the truck, a shadow moved in the trees beyond the road. He froze, his entire body going rigid. Eli? Claire asked nervously, following his gaze. What is it? He didn't answer. The shadow shifted again, and a faint, familiar voice drifted through the fog. You think you can run from me? It was Mark. Eli's blood ran cold. Stay in the truck, he ordered, his voice sharp with fear and anger. Lock the doors. Don't move. Eli, no, Claire began, but he slammed the doors shut before she could finish. As he turned back toward the trees, Mark stepped into the glow of the headlights, his face twisted with rage and something far darker. This isn't over, Mark growled, his voice low and menacing. Not by a long shot. The night seemed to hold its breath. Fog coiled between the trees like pale smoke, and the air felt thick enough to choke on. Eli stood in front of the truck, his body tense and ready, his fists curled, so tight his nails dug into his palms. Behind him, Claire sat inside the cab with the doors locked, her wide eyes watching through the window, terrified and helpless. Mark's silhouette wavered in the mist, then came into focus as he stepped closer. His boots crunched on gravel, each step deliberate, echoing like a countdown to something inevitable. The look on his face sent a cold shiver down Eli's spine. It wasn't just anger. It was betrayal, fury, and years of buried resentment all tangled together. You really thought you could just take her? Mark snarled, his voice low but cutting like a blade. Leave me behind. Leave this family behind. Eli's voice was steady, though inside he was anything but calm. This isn't about you, Mark. It's never been about you. The hell it hasn't. Mark roared, his whole body shaking. Everything's been about you since we were kids. Dad's favorite. The golden boy. The one who could do no wrong. And me. His laugh was sharp, bitter, almost broken. I was just the shadow you stepped over on your way to the top. Eli swallowed hard. I never wanted that. I never wanted any of it. Mark's eyes blazed. Then why did you take the only thing I ever cared about? Claire's breath fogged up the truck window as she pressed her hand against the glass, her tears blurring the scene in front of her. Eli, please, she whispered to herself, though he couldn't hear her. Please don't let this destroy you. Eli took a careful step forward, trying to keep his voice calm. Mark, listen to me. Claire isn't some prize to be won or stolen. She's a person, a woman with her own choices, her own feelings. She chose me, Mark. You need to accept that. Mark's face twisted with rage. She didn't choose you, he spat. You manipulated her. Took advantage of her when she was vulnerable. Don't you dare stand there and act like this is some love story. Eli's control snapped. You weren't there, he shouted, his voice echoing through the night. You don't know what it was like, watching her suffer, holding her while she cried herself to sleep, praying every day she'd find a reason to keep going. I didn't plan to fall in love with her. God, I tried to fight it. But it happened. And I won't apologize for it anymore. For a heartbeat, Mark faltered, a flicker of pain crossing his face. But then it was gone, replaced by pure, unrelenting fury. Mark lunged forward, his fist swinging toward Eli's jaw. Eli ducked just in time, the blow grazing his cheek. He staggered back, his boots sliding on the damp gravel, but quickly regained his footing. "Stop this, Mark," Eli shouted. "It doesn't have to end like this." Mark didn't listen. With a guttural roar, he charged again, tackling Eli to the ground. The two brothers crashed into the dirt, rolling and grappling, their grunts and curses tearing through the silence of the forest. Claire screamed from inside the truck, pounding on the window. "Stop it! Please stop!" Eli managed to shove Mark off him, scrambling to his feet. But Mark was fast, fueled by rage and something far more dangerous: desperation. "You took everything from me," Mark bellowed, swinging wildly. His knuckles connected with Eli's ribs, knocking the wind out of him. Eli doubled over, gasping, but forced himself to stand his ground. "I didn't take everything," Eli rasped, wiping blood from his lip. "You threw it away yourself." Mark froze, chest heaving, his eyes wild. "What did you say?" "You heard me," Eli said, his voice low, cutting through the fog like a blade. "All these years, you've blamed me for every mistake you've ever made. But the truth is, Mark, you hated yourself long before you ever hated me." The words landed like a physical blow. For a second, Mark's entire body seemed to sag, his rage crumbling under the weight of what he didn't want to face. But then his expression hardened again, more dangerous than ever. "Don't you dare psychoanalyze me," he hissed. "You think you're better than me? You're not. You're worse." He reached behind his back, and when his hand came forward, it held a pistol. Claire's scream split the night. "Eli!" "Gun!" Eli's heart lurched. He raised his hand slowly, taking a careful step back. "Mark," he said softly, desperately, "you don't want to do this." "Oh, I want to," Mark snarled, his finger hovering near the trigger. "But you've got one last chance to make this right. Walk away. Leave her. Leave this town. And never come back." Eli shook his head, his voice breaking. "I can't. I won't. Claire is my family now." Mark's hand trembled on the gun, his breathing ragged. "Then you leave me no choice," he said, almost to himself. Before he could fire, a loud crack split the night. A warning shot, fired into the air. "Drop it, Mark." Sheriff Dale's voice boomed from the darkness. The beam of a flashlight cut through the fog, revealing the sheriff standing just beyond the tree-line, his own gun trained on Mark. Mark spun around, startled. "Stay out of this, Dale. This is family business." "Family business or not," the sheriff barked, "you shoot that gun and you're finished. Don't make me put you down." Mark's chest heaved as he looked between Eli and the sheriff, his mind clearly unraveling. "I loved her," he said suddenly, his voice cracking. "I loved her before you ever noticed her, Eli. And you ruined it." Eli's face twisted in anguish. "Mark, she was never yours to love like that." Mark let out a broken sound, half laugh, half sob. And then, with a scream of pure rage, he turned the gun toward Eli. But before he could fire, a single shot rang out. Mark staggered backward, his eyes wide with shock. The gun fell from his hand, clattering to the ground. For a moment, he just stood there, swaying like a man in a dream. Then he collapsed into the fog. Sheriff Dale's voice trembled as he lowered his weapon. "God help us all," he whispered. For a moment, the world went completely still. The fog seemed to freeze in place, the trees holding their breath. Then, slowly, reality came crashing back in. The smell of gunpowder in the air, the harsh echo of the shot bouncing between the hills, Claire's ragged sobs tearing through the night. "No, no, no, no." Claire flung open the truck door and stumbled out, her bare feet hitting the cold gravel. She ran to where Mark had fallen, dropping to her knees beside him. Mark lay on his back, his eyes wide with shock, his breath coming in shallow, wet gasps. Blood seeped between his fingers where he clutched his side. He looked so different now, small, fragile, like the angry storm that had carried him all these years had finally burned itself out. Eli rushed forward, falling to his knees on the other side of his brother. "Mark, stay with me, you hear me? Stay with me." Mark's lips twisted into something that might have been a bitter smile. You never listen," he rasped, his voice barely audible. "Always think you know better." "Don't talk like that," Eli said fiercely, gripping his brother's shoulder. "You're going to be okay. We'll get you help." But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. The wound was too deep, the blood loss too severe. Mark's time was slipping away like water through their hands. Sheriff Dale crouched beside them, his face grim and pale under the harsh beam of his flashlight. "Eli," he said quietly, "we need to apply pressure, but he doesn't have long." Claire sobbed harder, clutching Mark's hand. "Please, Mark, don't leave like this. We can fix this. We can." Mark's gaze shifted to her, and for the first time that night, the anger in his eyes softened. "Claire," he breathed, her name breaking apart on his tongue. I'm sorry. For everything." Claire shook her head violently. No, don't you dare say goodbye. You can't." His fingers twitched weakly in hers, a faint squeeze. "I loved you," he whispered. "God help me. I always did." The confession shattered her. She bent over him, her tears falling onto his shirt, mixing with the blood. Eli's throat tightened until he could barely speak. "Mark, listen to me. Whatever's happened between us, you're still my brother. You always will be." Mark's eyes flicked to Eli's, and for a fleeting second, the rage and resentment seemed to melt away, leaving only the boy Eli had grown up with, the brother he'd once protected and loved. "Eli," Mark coughed, blood speckling his lips. "You ought to take care of her. Better than I did." "I will," Eli choked out, tears streaming down his face. "I swear it." Mark gave the faintest nod, his gaze drifting past them to the dark canopy of trees above. Then, with a shuddering breath, his body went still. The silence that followed was unbearable. Claire let out a piercing cry, collapsing against Eli's chest. No, please God, don't take him. Not like this." Eli wrapped his arms around her, holding her tightly as she sobbed. His own tears fell into her hair, his entire body shaking. "He's gone," Eli whispered, the words tasting like ash. "Oh, Claire, he's really gone." Sheriff Dale stood slowly, removing his hat and bowing his head. "Lord, have mercy," he murmured. Then, in a more practical tone, "We need to get him covered and call this in." Claire's head snapped up, panic flashing in her eyes. "No, you can't. If people find out what happened here, they'll never understand." Eli looked at the sheriff, his face etched with grief and desperation. "She's right. If the truth comes out, they'll see me as the villain. They'll see us as something filthy and wrong." Dale hesitated, clearly torn between duty and compassion. Finally, he sighed, shoulders sagging. "You two need to get out of here before anyone else arrives." I'll handle the rest." Claire stared at him, waited. "You do that for us?" The sheriff nodded solemnly. "I've known this family my whole life. I know how complicated things are. Mark, he made his choices. And you two deserve a chance to make yours." Eli's voice broke. "Thank you." "Go," Dale urged, his tone urgent now. "Before I change my mind." Eli helped Claire to her feet, their hands clinging to each other like lifelines. They walked back to the truck in silence, the fog closing around them like a shroud. When they reached the cab, Claire turned back for one last look. Through the mist, she could just barely see Mark's body lying still on the ground, the sheriff kneeling beside him like a sentinel of the dead. A sob tore from her throat. "I never wanted it to end like this," she whispered. Eli pulled her close, his lips brushing her hair. "Neither did I. But we have to keep moving. For us." As the truck roared to life and they drove away, the forest seemed to swallow the scene behind them. The road stretched ahead, dark and uncertain, but at least they were moving forward, together. Claire curled against Eli's side, her tears soaking his shirt. "Where will we go?" "Somewhere no one knows us," Eli said, his voice low and steady despite the storm raging inside him. "Somewhere we can start over." Claire closed her eyes, clinging to his words, to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. But even as the miles passed, Mark's final words haunted her. "I loved you. God help me. I always did." And deep down, she knew some wounds would never truly heal. The highway stretched endlessly before them, a gray ribbon vanishing into the dawn. Eli kept his hands tight on the steering wheel, his knuckles pale, his eyes fixed straight ahead. Beside him, Claire sat in silence, her head resting against the cool glass of the window, tears long since dried but leaving a salty ache in her throat. Neither of them spoke for miles. The only sound was the low hum of the engine and the occasional rush of wind when a semi roared past in the opposite lane. It felt like they were driving not just away from the forest, but away from everything they had ever known. The town, the life they once had, and Mark. Finally, Claire broke the silence. "Eli, do you think he hated me in the end?" Her voice was so small, so fragile, that it nearly broke Eli's heart. He glanced at her, then back at the road. "No," he said firmly. "Mark didn't hate you. He was lost, Claire. Angry at the world, at himself. But he didn't hate you." Her lips trembled as she whispered, "He said he loved me, right before." She couldn't finish the sentence. Eli reached over and gently took her hand, squeezing it tight. "I heard him," he said softly. "And I believe him. But love can twist a person when it's built on pain and regret. Mark's love wasn't like ours." Claire stared down at their joined hands, his larger, calloused fingers wrapped around hers. "It doesn't feel fair," she murmured. "It isn't," Eli admitted. "But all we can do now is try to live in a way that honors what he couldn't." The sun began to rise, painting the horizon in pale gold and soft pink. For a moment, the light seemed to chase away the darkness inside them, giving the illusion of hope. Claire let out a shaky breath. "Where will we even go, Eli? We can't just drive forever." He hesitated before answering. "There's a cabin up north, near a lake. My old friend Jack owns it. Nobody goes there this time of year. We can lay low for a while, figure out our next move." Claire nodded slowly, though her stomach churned at the thought of hiding, of living like fugitives. But what choice did they have? Eli glanced at her, his voice softer now. "We'll be safe there. I promise." A while later, they stopped at a small gas station in a nearly empty town, the kind of place where the paint peeled off the signs and the locals probably knew each other's names. "Stay in the truck," Eli said as he opened the door. Claire looked at him, worry etched in her face. "Why? What if someone recognizes us?" "That's why you need to stay out of sight. I'll grab supplies. It won't take long." Reluctantly, she nodded and slid lower in her seat as Eli walked toward the store. Through the cracked side mirror, she watched him disappear inside. Her heart pounded. Every passing car made her flinch. Every shadow looked like a threat. She wrapped her arms around herself, whispering under her breath, "Please hurry, Eli." Inside the store, Eli moved quickly, grabbing bottled water, canned food, and a couple of blankets. The cashier, an older man with a weathered face, eyed him suspiciously. "On a camping trip?" the man asked, ringing up the items. Eli forced a smile. "Something like that. Bit cold for camping this time of year," the man said, narrowing his eyes. Eli slid a wad of cash across the counter. "Yeah, well, we like the quiet." The cashier took the money but didn't look convinced. As Eli turned to leave, the man called out, "Hey, safe travels, son. Storm's coming tonight. Best get where you're going before it hits." Eli nodded, his pulse quickening. "Thanks. We'll be careful." When he returned to the truck, Claire immediately sat up. "You were gone forever," she said, her voice trembling. "What took so long?" "Just a chatty cashier," Eli replied, sliding into the driver's seat. "But we need to move. He might start asking questions later." As they drove away, Claire stared at the small gas station shrinking in the rearview mirror. It felt like every mile put more distance between them and safety, and yet safety seemed farther away than ever. They reached the cabin just as the first raindrops began to fall. It was small and secluded, surrounded by towering pines and overlooking a lake that stretched like a dark mirror under the storm clouds. Claire stepped inside and immediately hugged herself against the chill. It smelled of cedar and old smoke, with dusty furniture covered in faded blankets. "It's cozy," she said, trying to sound upbeat. Eli dropped the bags on the table and moved to light the fireplace. "It's safe," he corrected gently. "That's what matters." As the fire crackled to life, Claire sank onto the worn couch. For the first time since that night, she allowed herself to breathe. But deep down, she knew the storm wasn't over. It had only just begun. The world outside their small town felt so far away that winter morning, yet it seemed to close in on them at the same time. Snow blanketed the road leading out of the valley, muffling the usual sounds of life. It should have felt peaceful, but for Claire, every crunch of snow beneath her boots was a reminder of how fragile their secret had become. She stood by the window of Eli's small cabin, wrapped in a blanket he had draped around her shoulders just moments earlier. The soft fabric still carried his warmth, but it couldn't soothe the chill of fear creeping into her bones. She'd been awake since before dawn, unable to stop her mind from replaying the events of the past few days. Eli came up behind her quietly, his presence like a shadow she could feel even without turning around. His hand hovered near her back for a moment, then finally settled there, grounding her. "Claire," he said, his voice low and rough, "we can't keep going like this. Last night, someone saw us leave the barn together. I don't know who, but..." Her breath caught. "Who? Who would have been out there that late?" "I don't know," Eli admitted, shaking his head. "But this isn't like before. We've been careful, but now it feels like the walls are closing in. If word gets out, it won't just hurt us. It'll destroy everything." Claire turned to face him, her hands gripping the edges of the blanket tightly. "We've survived so much already," she said, her voice trembling but fierce. "Eli, please don't tell me you're ready to walk away now. Not after everything we've fought through." His jaw tightened, his dark eyes flashing with conflict. "I'm not ready to walk away from you," he said, each word like a vow torn from his chest. "But I can't protect you if everyone turns against us. Claire, you don't know how cruel this town can be. They'll twist what we have into something ugly, something shameful." Claire's tears spilled over, streaking her cheeks as she shook her head. "They don't get to decide what we are," she whispered fiercely. "You and me, what we've built together, it's real. It's ours. They don't have the right to take that from us." Eli cupped her face in his hands, his thumb brushing away her tears. For a moment, it was just the two of them in their small, fragile world. "I want to believe that," he said softly. "But love doesn't always win against hate. I've seen too much to believe otherwise." The cabin door rattled suddenly, and they both froze. A heavy knock followed, loud enough to make Claire's heart leap into her throat. "Eli," a voice called from outside, deep, urgent, and far too familiar. Claire's pulse raced. "Mark," she breathed, her voice barely audible. Eli's body went rigid, his hand falling away from her face. His expression was unreadable, a storm brewing behind his eyes. "Stay here," he ordered quietly. "No matter what happens, don't come out until I tell you." Before she could argue, he turned and crossed the room in 3 long strides. As he opened the door, a gust of icy wind swept inside, carrying with it the smell of snow and danger. Mark stood there, his coat dusted with frost, his face pale and tense. His eyes flicked past Eli for just a fraction of a second, as if searching for someone, as if he already knew Claire was there. "We need to talk," Mark said, his tone sharp and unyielding. Eli's hand gripped the doorframe, his knuckles white. "About what?" he asked carefully, though his voice carried an edge of warning. Mark's gaze narrowed, and when he spoke again, the words landed like a hammer. "About you. About Claire. And about the truth you've both been hiding from me." Behind Eli, Claire's heart stopped. The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet, the blanket slipping from her shoulders and pooling silently on the floor. For a moment, no one moved. The only sound was the wind howling outside and the rapid, terrified beat of her own heart. Eli didn't turn around, didn't even glance back at her, but she could see the way his shoulders squared, bracing for a fight. "Mark," he said slowly, his voice like the low rumble of distant thunder. You don't know what you're talking about. Mark took a single step forward, his boots crunching on the threshold. Don't I? He challenged, his tone cutting like ice. I saw you too. Maybe not everything, but enough. And now you're going to tell me the rest. You owe me that much. Claire clutched her hands to her chest, silently praying for a miracle. But deep down, she knew there was no going back. The truth was here. It had come knocking, and it was ready to tear their fragile world apart. The room felt impossibly small as Mark's words hung in the air, heavy and sharp like broken glass. Claire's chest tightened, her breath coming in shallow, painful bursts. It was as if the entire world had been holding its breath right along with her, waiting for this exact moment, the moment when everything would finally shatter. Eli's hand still gripped the doorframe, but his other hand curled into a fist at his side. His shoulders were rigid, his body coiled like a man standing at the edge of a cliff. You don't understand, Mark, he said quietly, forcing each word through clenched teeth. You don't know what you think you know. Mark's eyes flashed with anger and something deeper, betrayal, maybe, or hurt that had festered too long to be contained. Don't lie to me, Mark snapped. His voice cracked on the last word, as if the anger was the only thing holding him together. I've been trying to ignore it for weeks, Eli. The looks, the way you protect her, the excuses you make. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining it. But last night, his jaw trembled, and for a fleeting moment, he looked less like a man and more like a boy lost in the storm. Last night, I saw you together. I saw you holding her like... He broke off, his throat closing around the words. He swallowed hard and tried again, his voice breaking. Like she meant more to you than she should. Claire's knees nearly buckled. She pressed herself against the wall, hidden in the shadows, biting her fist to keep from crying out. The image of Mark standing in the snow, watching them through the darkness, burned into her mind. He hadn't just suspected. He had known. Eli's face was a mask of control, but his eyes betrayed him, a flicker of panic, of helplessness. Mark, he said carefully, his voice low and steady, you need to leave. Right now. Mark laughed, but it was a bitter, broken sound that made Claire's stomach twist. Leave? After what I've seen. After everything you've done behind my back. He took another step into the cabin, his breath misting in the cold air between them. Tell me, Eli. Tell me the truth. Do you love her? The question struck like lightning. Claire's breath caught in her throat. Eli didn't move, didn't blink, but the silence was louder than any confession could have been. Mark's eyes widened, glistening with tears that he refused to let fall. My God, he whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of it all. You do. You do love her. Mark, Eli started, but Mark held up a shaking hand, cutting him off. No, don't. I don't want to hear excuses. His voice hardened, though it trembled with emotion. You were supposed to be my brother, Eli. The one person I could trust. And Claire. He turned, his gaze finally locking onto where she stood frozen in the shadows. You were supposed to be my family. How could you? Claire stepped forward, her hands raised in a desperate plea. Mark, please, she choked out, tears streaming down her face. It's not what you think. We never meant to hurt you. Mark's expression twisted, a storm of grief and rage. Not what I think, he spat. Then tell me, Claire. Tell me what it is. Tell me how sneaking around behind my back, lying to my face, is anything other than betrayal. Claire's voice broke, her words tumbling out between sobs. It wasn't supposed to happen. I fought it, Eli fought it, but... She clutched her chest, as if the pain inside her was too much to bear. We love each other, Mark. We didn't choose it. It happened. For a heartbeat, there was only silence. Even the wind outside seemed to hold still, waiting. Mark's face went pale, his breath hitching in disbelief. He stumbled back a step as if her words had physically struck him. No, he whispered, shaking his head violently. No, no, no. His voice rose, hoarse and raw. You don't get to say that to me. You don't get to stand there and tell me you love him like it's some kind of excuse. Eli moved then, stepping between them, his body tense and protective. "Mark, stop," he commanded, his voice deep and unyielding. "You're angry, and you have every right to be. But don't take it out on her. This is on me." Mark's hands balled into fists. "You think that makes it better? You think taking the blame erases what you've done?" Eli didn't flinch. "No," he said simply. "But I won't let you tear her apart because of me." The brothers stared at each other, the air between them electric with unspoken history, years of loyalty and resentment, love and rivalry. Claire stood trembling behind Eli, torn between the two men she cared for in different, complicated ways. Mark's chest heaved as he fought to control himself. Finally, he spoke, his voice shaking with a quiet fury. "I can't look at either of you right now," he said, each word clipped and bitter. "If you have any shred of decency left, you'll both stay away from me. From this town. From everything." He turned sharply and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls rattled. The silence that followed was deafening. Claire sank to her knees, sobbing into her hands. "Eli," she gasped, her voice raw with despair. "What have we done?" Eli dropped to the floor beside her, wrapping his arms around her trembling body. His own tears slipped silently down his face as he held her close, knowing there was no undoing what had just happened. "Everything's changed," he whispered, his voice breaking. And for the first time, Claire truly believed him. The cabin felt like a hollow shell after Mark left. The walls seemed to echo with his rage, his heartbreak, his disbelief. Claire sat on the floor, clutching Eli's shirt in her fists, trembling so hard she thought her bones might break apart. Eli held her as tightly as he could, though his own body shook. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The only sound was the soft, jagged rhythm of their breathing, mingling with the wind's lonely howl outside. Finally, Claire pulled back just enough to look into his face. His eyes were red-rimmed, his jaw clenched so tight it trembled. "Eli," she whispered, her voice so fragile it barely carried past her lips, "we've ruined everything. Mark, he'll never forgive us." Eli closed his eyes, the weight of her words sinking deep. "I know," he said hoarsely. "I've lost him. My brother. The only family I had left." Claire's tears blurred her vision. She reached up, cupping his face with trembling hands. "And me?" she asked, desperate. "Have you lost me too?" He opened his eyes slowly, meeting her gaze with a raw, aching intensity. "No," he vowed. "I'll never lose you. Even if the whole world turns against us, Claire, I'll fight for you." Her sob turned into a broken laugh. "But what if fighting means we destroy everything else? What if loving me costs you everything you've ever known?" He caught her hands, pressing them to his chest, to the steady beat of his heart. "Then so be it," he said firmly. "I'd rather lose everything than live a lie." The truth of his words cut through the storm raging inside her. For a moment, she let herself believe it could be that simple, that love could be enough. But reality was waiting for them outside that cabin. They didn't leave until the sun began to rise, its pale light spilling across the snow like a silent witness. Claire walked beside Eli, her fingers laced with his, both of them knowing this might be the last time they could walk openly together without fear. When they reached the edge of town, Eli stopped. The distant smoke rising from chimneys, the faint sound of early morning life, it all felt impossibly far away, like another world entirely. "Claire," he said quietly, his breath visible in the cold morning air. "You should go back alone." Her head snapped up, panic flaring in her chest. "No," she protested, clutching his hand tighter. "Don't you dare leave me now." He swallowed hard, his eyes glistening. "If we walk in together, they'll know. People will talk. Mark will talk. This town will eat you alive, Claire." Her tears spilled over, but she shook her head fiercely. Let them. Let them say whatever they want. "I don't care, Eli. I only care about you." He smiled then, but it was a sad, broken smile. "You're stronger than me," he whispered. "But I can't stand to see you hurt. So I'll take the blame. I'll leave if that's what it takes to keep you safe." Her breath caught. "Leave? Where would you even go?" "Anywhere," he said, his voice firm but quiet. "Somewhere no one knows us. Somewhere we can start over someday." He cupped her face, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "But right now you have to go home. Pretend. Heal. And maybe one day we'll find each other again. Claire's heart felt like it was splintering into 1,000 sharp pieces. She wanted to scream, to beg him to stay, to tell him she couldn't face a single day without him. But when she saw the love and the fierce determination in his eyes, the words died on her lips. So instead, she kissed him. Softly, desperately, like a promise and a goodbye all at once. The kind of kiss that leaves a mark on the soul. When she finally pulled away, she whispered, "I'll wait for you, no matter how long it takes." Eli nodded, though his own tears betrayed the pain beneath his calm exterior. "And I'll come back for you, no matter how far I have to go." They parted then, Claire walking back toward the town, each step heavier than the last, and Eli disappearing into the woods, his figure swallowed by the trees and the falling snow. As Claire reached the edge of her street, she paused. The morning light bathed the town in a golden glow, making it look almost peaceful. But she knew the truth beneath that surface, the whispers that would come, the judgment, the heartbreak. And yet, beneath all the pain, there was still a fragile thread of hope. That night, as she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Claire replayed Eli's last words over and over. "I'll come back for you, no matter how far I have to go." A single tear slid down her cheek, but this time, she didn't feel broken. Because love, even when it was forbidden and complicated and messy, was still hers to hold. And in that quiet, fragile hope, she finally drifted to sleep, knowing that somewhere out there, beneath the same sky, Eli was thinking of her too.